what Leslie was speaking of is that the next phase, we're going to be short $190,000.
So the cost to go from the 30 to 100% is what you're talking about is
Right.
is 190,000.
Right.
And how does their pricing compare to the other bidders? Were they the low bidder? Were they second? You know, where do they rank? I know you didn't select them based on price, but where do they rank based on price?
I'd have to. I would say with the negotiation, they were pretty comparable to the second lowest bidder, to the second lowest price.
So they came in higher.
They came in higher and then reduced their pricing.
And when you say pretty comparable,
I think the other company was like 745, and they came in at 780.
and do you recall where they were for the first two phases? Your second highest bidder.
I don't remember where they were.
Okay. Does anyone besides me have questions for Mr. Minnelli? I have some more questions, actually. I'm curious about, there's been talk in the community about developing Eastern Greenwich Civic Center as a zero net building. Was that part of your RFP process? And if not, why not? And you said there are different construction designs, so maybe you could talk a little bit about the energy conservation aspects of the building.
I'm going to read what was in the RFP. It is understood that this new building will have increased utility costs because the existing building is not air conditioned. This one would be associated with this cost of operation, but the architects must incorporate every possible design technique to keep the overall annual energy expenses in check. Exclusive use of LED lighting and thermal insulation will have an impact that is currently not realized in the existing building. The LEED certification is not a requirement of the design. We've also, during that presentation, we asked, not in the presentation, excuse me, as part of their requirements is to perform a, to look at the various devices we could incorporate into design of the building, whether we do solar panels, photovoltaic, or some other energy savings means. But I don't think this is going to be a net. There's no way this is going to be a net zero building.
When you say there's no way,
I mean, just there's not enough space there to create that much energy.
okay, you think it's because of space constraints. Is that a conversation that you're going to continue to have with the architect as they develop their designs, as a possibility as an alternate or as a...
The idea is to keep the energy increase as low as possible.
At what point are you going to be, if you get this release, it goes to the RTM, right? The release of conditions, you're going to start with the architect right away. Are you envisioning having conversations with them? So you're not envisioning having conversations with them about proposing an alternative that might be a net zero building?
I mean, we could ask them, but I just don't know how it's going to be accomplished.
Yeah, Ms. Moriarty.
Just to add to that, I know that new school buildings or any school building that's required to get, that is eligible for state reimbursement is required to be equivalent to LEED Silver. I know they've changed the language that it's not LEED Silver anymore, it's high efficiency building. I don't know how that is different from a net zero building, but wondering whether that can be a goal for this building, that any new construction town building should meet the standards of LEED Silver.
We did not require LEEDs as a requirement. And LEEDs is not really focusing in on energy reduction as much as it is to save carbon footprinting. So when it comes to energy, we're going, and it's part of this requirement, I just can't find the exact verbiage. We've asked him to run a number of scenarios on how to make the building as energy efficient as possible. Just can't put my finger on it.
Yeah, I think it would be, given the interest in this topic, as you pursue conversations with the architect, if this release of conditions is approved, that you weigh what the alternatives are that might either allow it to be LEED Silver or net zero, whatever the option, knowing that there could be an incremental cost, but we won't know what it is unless we ask the question.
There'll
right?
definitely be an incremental cost.
You don't know what the cost is until you ask the question, right?
Exactly.
So to at least to have the data in front of us so
Yep.
that we can make that decision. Ms. Tarkington.
So, as we discuss this, it makes me concerned about costs. I know your summary was specific that you weren't going to require LEED Silver in terms of costs, but my questions also relate to costs because in our long-term plan, we have $15 million as the projected capital cost, which, as you had described at the previous meeting, budget committee, is about $500 a square foot. So that's approximately just over around 30,000 square feet, which is more or less the current size of the existing building. But then you've also described that this proposed plan will increase by another 8,000 square feet. I think that's what, that's what the additional room is going to be.
I think it's actually 6,000 square feet.
Well, it said
something like that.
8,000 in your paperwork. So from 31,000 to 38,000 plus, and I think there was a 6,000 number when I read the thing, or 8,000 number. So, again, that's about $4 million additional at $500 a square foot. Are you concerned that we've sort of set multiple goals here for the architect, one in terms of square feet and another that we kind of have ballparked as the cost? And then also, Alan, again, you relayed to us in the budget committee that we're going to be short in architectural costs. When you take that number and again use that as a multiplier, it again comes up to be around 4,000 square feet. So $4 million additional costs for this project. What is dominant here? Is it sort of the costs, or is it these growing goals that people have for this building?
Actually, at this point, it's the goals. So the architect, and I have sort of alluded to this in Jill's answer that I gave to Jill a minute ago, was during the presentation, the architect said that his design would be less than $15 million.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Ms. Cromick.
Just wondering, when you talk about the 190,000 that you're going to be requesting after this, what's that for?
The amount of money that was been appropriated, including the $300,000 that's in this year's budget, is short by $190,000 to complete the total $780,000 the architect is looking for.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Mr. Minnelli? Thank you for the explanation. We have a motion to release the conditions on the initial design for the initial design of Eastern Greenwich Civic Center, made by Ms. Moriarty, seconded by Ms. Tarkington, in the amount of $170,000. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried.
Thank you.
12-0. Thank you. Okay. Which brings us back to the other two non-routine applications on our agenda. The first one is SE1. Can I have a motion to move that forward? Mr. Raymer.
I would move that SE1 be approved for an appropriation of $12,565.17.
Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Vasiliotis. Ms. Crummett, can you please give the Law Committee report?
Certainly. The Law Committee took up this request for approval of the settlement, and the Law Committee approved the settlement in the amount of $12,565.17 by a vote of 2-0-0.
Okay. Is there further discussion on this motion? Okay, so the motion made by Mr. Raymer, seconded by Ms. Vasiliotis, to approve an additional appropriation and settlement of the Standard Fire Insurance Company versus the Town of Greenwich and O'Connor in the amount of $12,565.17. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0. The next item on the agenda is SE2. Can someone please move, Ms. Crumick?
Yes, I'd like to move SE2, a request by the First Selectman to settle the Wurzel v. Town of Greenwich case, which also is the Chubb as the subrogee of Wurzel as a party to this. And the amount is for $11,049.49.
Thank you. Is there a second? Okay, motion by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Ms. Vasiliotis. Ms. Crumick, can you give the Law Committee report, please?
The Law Committee took up this claim for property damage and approved the proposed settlement in the amount of $11,049.49 by a vote of 2-0-0.
Okay, is there further discussion on this item? Hearing none, we have a motion made by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Ms. Vasiliotis to approve the additional appropriation in the settlement of Wurzel versus the Town of Greenwich, the amount of $11,049.49. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0. Okay. We also have 3 budget requests identified as routine. Ms. Crumick, can you please move these routine items?
Item number HD1 from the Health Department in the amount of $66,752. The approval to use public funds for fiscal year 2019, 2020, I believe that should be. Item number PW3 from the Department of Public Works in the amount of $3 million to release the conditions on the Byram Fire Station rehabilitation. Item number TA1 from the Transportation Association of Greenwich, better known as TAG, in the amount of $73,750 to release the conditions on TAG and Safe Rides contributions.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Seconded by Mr. Raymer. Ms. Moriarty, can you please give the Budget Committee report?
So the Budget Committee took up these 3 items at our meeting last Tuesday. HD1 from the Health Department, approval to use the Public Act funds for fiscal 20. This is an annual grant from the state. This is a similar amount to the prior year. I believe it's just a little bit lower. The proposed uses, the significant ones, are a part-time specialist for Medicare and insurance billing, and a consultant to continue the accreditation process, the purchase of a dental chair and supplies, a temporary aid to help with environmental sampling, and a few other items. The vote at the Budget Committee was 4-0-0. Item PW3 from DPW, the release of conditions on the Byram Fire Station rehabilitation for $3 million. The condition on this appropriation was the receipt and acceptance of project bids. This item first came to the Budget Committee in June, where during discussion it was indicated that the total cost for the project, including soft costs and contingency, would put the project over the $3 million appropriated amount. So we advised DPW to return to the Budget Committee the following month with an interim appropriation request for $450,000 to have sufficient funds to complete the entire project. The BET approved this in July. They went to the RTM in September for approval, received that approval, so they returned to the Budget Committee last Tuesday to get the release on the $3 million. The vote on this item was also 4-0. On the health item, it was 4-0. And then the last item was Transportation Association of Greenwich, release of condition of $73,750. This condition is the release by the BET based on our review and acceptance of a semi-annual report on TAG operations, personnel, and finances. The BET released the first half of fiscal 20 funds in June, and TAG had access to those funds as of July 1st. TAG is now requesting half of the remaining funds at this point for the following reasons. Their cash flow is dependent on fundraising, which happens later in the year. They do expect to return in December for the remaining 25%, consistent with their cash flow projections. At this point, the revenue and costs are in line with their budget, and they expect to generate a cash surplus by the end of the year to mitigate this need in the future. And the vote at the Budget Committee was 4-0 for release.
Thank you, Ms. Moriarty. Is there any discussion? Ms. Hess?
I more just want to make just a couple comments. One, on TAG, congratulations on all the progress that you've made over these past couple of years. I just want to bring up, we've talked about lining up your revenues as it relates to the expenditures on the town side, and maybe if that's something you can do the next time you come back, just to make sure you've lined up with the budget that we approved this year. But a great job, so thank you for all the hard work. Second, I just want to clarify, I think it's just a typo, I just noticed it now, I'm sorry, HD1, public funds for fiscal year, it should be 1920, I think that's what you said, Leslie, I just want to clarify that, Moriarty.
Ms. Crumick identified that when she made the
I'm
motion.
sorry, I missed that, okay, thank you.
Any further discussion on these theory items? So we have a motion to approve made by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Mr. Raymer, HD1, PW3, and TA1. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Those items have carried 12-0. Thank you. Okay. We go back to my, which brings us to the assessor's report. Ms. Elliott.
Good evening, Madam Chair and fellow members of the BET. I'd like to present the assessor's report for September 2019. First of all, the Board of Assessment Appeals met on September 12th for motor vehicles only. We had 62 motor vehicle appeals, which reduced the grand list, the 2018 grand list, in the amount of $394,835 in assessment. That's basically a tax loss of roughly $4,612. On Friday, September 20th, we sent out personal property declarations to all the businesses in town. It is time again for them to file as they are required each year. Those declarations are due back November 1st. If you recall, last year we had about 500 or so accounts we experimented with filing electronically. This year we're going to let all accounts, if they wish, file electronically. So hopefully we can get a majority of them to do so, and we will not have to continue to send out the declarations. Everybody did get a declaration in the mail this year as well, but there's also a letter out there as well that gives them instructions to file electronically, and once they start to do so, we'll be able to cut down on our mailings on that. The 2020 revaluation. We have sent out award letters to Tyler Technologies and J.F. Ryan and Associates. If you recall, those were the companies, the vendors that did the 2015 revaluation, and they're going to be doing the 2020 revaluation as well. Once we complete the 2019 grand list, we will start the 2020 revaluation, and fingers crossed, hopefully it will go as smoothly as the 2015 did. Does anybody have any questions for me this evening?
Mr. Raymer.
Did you want to make reference to the audits on the non-filers on the personal property returns?
Sure. We've retained a company. There have been just a handful of businesses that have actually never filed a personal property declaration. So over the course of those years, we have been estimating their declarations for them as far as how much value they have in their office furniture and business personal property. We will have them audited starting in October. So in other words, this company shall contact the businesses, so set up an appointment, and they'll start going through the process so we can determine whether or not they are underpaying or overpaying. It's hard to know, but there are just a handful. I think there's about 10 or 12 that have never filed to us, and we will start with those. Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Elliott? Can I have a motion to?
So I move that we accept the assessor's report.
Second.
So a motion by Ms. Tarkington, seconded by Mr. Raymer to accept the assessor's report. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0. Thank you. Mr. Monarski. Before you start, I would like to steal your thunder and say congratulations for the award of Financial Reporting Achievement to Peter Minarski, Comptroller and Chief Financial Officer of the Town of Greenwich from the Government Finance Officers Association. How many years in a row have you?
It's 15 for me, and I think it's 58 for the town.
58 for the town.
And most importantly, you left out the staff. Roland Geiger, Maureen Tracy, Natasha Yemitz. It's a team effort.
Great.
It was actually the beginning of my controller's report. The auditors have come back last Monday, September 16th. We're well ahead of schedule. And I usually put this in the July report, but this year it was late, and I got it today. Therefore, I handed it out instead of I'm giving a verbal update on the award. The second page is the certificate. It goes in the CAFR, and there's a lot of hard work that goes into that.
So thank you. Thanks to Mr. Geiger and Ms. Yamitz and Ms. Tracy for all of your hard work, keeping us ahead of the curve, top notch. Thank you.
You're welcome. Two more quick updates, and I'll open it to questions. At the audit committee meeting, I think there was 11 BET members. The risk manager, Megan D'Amato, remarried, and her new name is Zanesky. It's Z-A-N-E-S-K-Y. She's having a little difficulty changing the email, so if you try to, I know there's a number of you that are in contact with her from time to time. Email me if anything kicks back during the transition. And the third update, and again, it's the risk manager. You remember we had that storm in 2012 in October, Superstorm Sandy. Through all the hard work of Ron Lally and Pat Marinan, the previous risk manager, we got almost $5 million in reimbursements, and we had that one piece hanging out there for years. As a matter of fact, I took it out of the controller's report. It was in there for a couple of years. Through Megan's persistence, you can see on page 4, the second paragraph, we've got about $761,000 we're looking for to get back. That's Greenwich Point. The BET appropriated over $3 million in December of 12 for Island Beach, Greenwich Point, and various other sites around town. So kudos to Megan Zaneski. And I will open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Minarski. Are there any questions for Mr. Minarski? Mr. Drake.
Just well done job on financial reporting like you all do every year.
Thank you.
Good work.
Any other questions? Can I get a motion to accept the Comptroller's report? Motion by Ms. Tarkington, seconded by Mr. Raymer. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0. Thank you, Mr. Minarski. The next item on the agenda is the Treasurer's Report showing investing portfolio activity for the months of July and August 2019. Are there any questions on the Treasurer's Report? Hearing none, I note that the BET has received the report. There are no standing committee reports and no liaison reports. The BET Special Project Team reports, Mr. Raymer and Mr. Mason. Is there a report on the labor contracts?
Yes. Don't mean to supplant Mike if Mike wants to make a report, but at last Thursday's Board of Education meeting, the Board of Education approved by a 7-0 vote the GEA contract. I understand the same day the rank and file of the union approved it also. The contract is on the website of the town. It's red marked to show the changes to the contract. The bottom line, perhaps I summarize it best by saying that on the 3-year contract, in year 1, the cost of contract is about $2,768,000. That's about a 2.9% increase. In year 2, it's $2,842,000 roughly. It's also a 2.9 increase. In year 3, the cost of contract is $2,974,000 roughly, which is a 2.94% increase on cost of contract. The total impact over the 3 years is 8.74%.
Mr. Basie.
I'd like to add to that, in addition to the numbers Mr. Raymer's reporting, there was a change on the
employee contribution on the health care, a change of 1.5% in each of the 3 years going forward in the contract. And I want to thank Mr. Raymer, Mr. Oberlander. That was a lengthy process. It went all the way through mediation, and it didn't even really settle then. We didn't come to an agreement until right before arbitration was to happen, and that's a big proposition for the town. So there was a lot of input on the Board of Ed side. There was Board of Ed member Dayton, Bernstein, and Rabin, and we spent a lot of hours on this contract. This was a lengthy one. It started with a list of 40 items to discuss and an initial offer on their side with a cost of contract in excess of 20% for 3 years. And as Mr. Raymer reported, the numbers came down reasonable, and it starts with the input from our Labor Contracts Committee of the RTM through our deliberations. So it was quite a process, and I think it worked out best for all parties. So thank you.
Mr. Mason, just to clarify, the employee health care, the employees will be increasing 1.5% more each year, correct?
Absolutely correct. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Raymer or Mr. Mason on that? Thank you for your service. I know it was a lot of time over the course of the summer. Ms. Vasiliotis?
I just had one question. How does our town benchmark against other towns with respect to the health care contribution? Do you know that?
Mr. Mason?
Jeff, I don't know the answer to that.
So the answer is that the Board of Ed, through the law department, specializes in a firm where the town normally has our own labor contracts director. They specialize in a firm that deals in labor contracts all through the state. So the beginning part of the process is benchmarking our starting salary, our step increases, our health care co-pays. The level of coverage is not really a discussion anymore because everybody's on the state exchange program pretty much now, I would think. And we start with a benchmarking, and from our DERG A schools to our DERG B schools, we go through the whole process, and that's where we start the conversation. So we knew in this particular case that was an area where our contract might have been a little bit more favorable than our peer communities, and our peer communities are the ones you would expect in Fairfield County. So then that brings into the conversation. So I think that would be the accurate answer to that.
Just a follow-up question, I'm sorry. I believe that the RTM or somebody in the past said a 2% increase. We came in at 2.9%. Is that considered close enough for the government?
Mr. Mason?
The Board of Education, there's steps in the Board of Ed. There are 9 steps in their contract from the time that an educator gets hired. Then on top of that, there's GWI because we have a staff that has gone through all the steps. So there's a combination of steps and a combination of GWI increases. Then you bring in the benefits and the added costs for coaching and some of the other stipends that go into contract. There's some funds for different travel. There's some other stipends that go in there. And when you mathematically do the multiplication, it works up to those numbers.
Ms. Hess?
How do these numbers compare to what we have in the budget? I guess Pete or Roland, or does?
Ms. Moriarty?
This is for fiscal '21, so we're just in the process of creating that budget now.
Okay, so it won't impact this current year?
Correct. It starts July 1.
If I may, correct.
Mr. Mason.
The state statutes require that municipalities settle the contracts with their educators, hang on one second, by October 1st for the July 1 begin of the next fiscal year. So there's a timeline to this contract where it has to be either settled, mediated, or arbitrated. So it has to be done by October 1st, and then they agree on it, and it'll for our July 1 budget that begins next year.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you for the report, which brings us to old business, for which there is none, and brings us to new business. And the first item under our new business is a discussion of the Greenwich Transportation Center redevelopment agreement. Thanks to those of you who were in attendance for our workshop last week, which was very productive and lengthy, and I wanted to open up the discussion here. I have it as a discussion and not a vote as of yet, but wanted to see whether the BET members were prepared to take a vote on this or just wanted to talk about things that were highlighted in the workshop. I wanted to find out reactions to the workshop and Where do you all want to go next with this? Any takers? Ms. Moriarty.
First, I want to thank the First Selectman and Ben Brannion, as well as Ashforth's management to participating. I think we shared a lot of had a lot of interesting discussions. We shared a lot of questions. I think where I left that meeting is I still think there are outstanding questions on valuation of the asset being sold, as well as the valuation of what is being offered to the town. And so I'll jump to the end. Is at this point, I cannot support the deal that's proposed to us, but I do think that we have a relationship with Ashforth. We have an asset that is tied up with a difficult ownership structure, and it's worth continuing conversations to address what's best for both the town and for Ashforth.
Thank you, Ms. Moriarty. And yes, I echo the thanks to the First Selectman's office and to the representatives from Ashforth on attending and helping us sort through all of the difficult questions. Any other reactions or comments? Mr. Raymer.
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I think it was evident from the questions and answers that were given during the course of that hearing that there are a number of facts that are very relevant and that we don't have the answers to. Much more important, it's a technical area. It's an area that benefits from some experience in the field. I don't think the people that we have at this moment looking at it have all that experience. And I think it was evident from some of the questions and answers that I was hearing that it would be smart for us to be bringing on board people with an expertise in the area to help us understand the nature of the transaction and how to position it going forward. I think a clarity on this, frankly, would be assisted if the BET were to take a relatively early vote on this, so that they get a reflection back of whether or not the deal as presented has support, at least within the BET. That is not meant to close out the transaction. My thought is that I'm feeling that there's support for this deal does not exist in the BET right now, and that once we put that concept aside, we can then hunker down and begin to understand how should this deal be structured to serve all the parties best. As I said during the course of that workshop, I think this is a marquee property. I think it's important to us that we see this property prosperous. Railroad stations can be funky sometimes. If they are allowed to become seedy, that can become a place that becomes a nest for things that are not attractive for the town. So I think it's in our interest not to allow that to happen. I have regard for Ashforth. As I said during the workshop, I think they've been a present partner. There's no question that the existing arrangement, as you come to September 21st, 2057, gets you to a very odd place. Under Section 21 of the air rights lease, it says that although the parties can exchange good faith offers and negotiations, if there is no negotiation, then when the bell rings on the 21st of September in that year 2057, suddenly we own everything which is over the top of a chunk of land of which our chunk is 57.18, I think the number is, % of the acreage, and Ashforth owns the balance. But we each also own everything that there is by way of improvements that lie over the top of that chunk of land. As I look at the schematics and the survey, it appears to me that the majority of the buildings, at least their footprint, lie on the town, the Greenwich-owned land, not the Ashforth land. But it's very hard to tell, and the footprint doesn't necessarily tell you which are the valuable assets and which are not the not valuable assets. So that's a very shaky point. But the fact of the matter is then to find yourself in a position where we own the back half of a pair of buildings in a difficult relationship at that point with the people who own the front half, none of those things seem to be independently viable. It's a very strange, oddball thing for us to have structured in the contract, and we definitely should be taking this opportunity to try and heal that problem with a more orderly solution to it. I certainly agree with everybody who is suggesting that the value being offered in return for what the town seems to be giving up under the present deal does not seem to make economic sense. I had a conversation at one point with the assessor who's present here. I know the assessor, she'll bring me up smartly if I quote her incorrectly, but I believe my conversation with her at the time that the value today of the entire lot, that is to say, the buildings standing on both the town-owned piece and the Ashforth-owned piece, have a value today of more or less something like $294 million. You can struggle for a while with what discount rates to apply as the value of the property passes over time, and then discount those sums back against to achieve a net present value on them, and you can get a wide variety of numbers. But I think by any sense those numbers are much larger numbers than the value that's being offered us today of a developer putting $15 million worth of improvement into property that he owns, that they own, it would be better for me to say, but which are being handled in such a way to try and extend some non-pecuniary benefits to the town. I don't disparage the offer that's made, but I don't think it's fair value. For all those reasons, sorry to talk so long, Madam Chairman, but for all those reasons, I think that it's important that we address this transaction. I don't think the offer that's being made to us today is the correct offer. I think we would benefit the parties to give a prompt vote of a polite rejection of that particular offer, and then hunker down on our next steps to try and bring this matter to a successful conclusion that benefits both parties. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Raymer. Ms. Tarkington.
Yes, I did not come to this meeting prepared to vote for any transaction on the Greenwich Transportation Center. I certainly agree that we had a meeting. I think we value the Ashforth properties and its role, in the heart of central Greenwich. But, again, as presented, or even as presented on this agenda as a discussion of the agreement, I mean, to me, this is, someone who's worked a lot with both commercial real estate and certainly with capital leases, it needs to be separated out. We're taking a capital lease document and then trying to you put in it some kind of a redevelopment agreement. I think that that in terms of moving ahead, we need to separate these. We need to have a financial attorney working on the structure of the capital lease and whatever, next steps we would approach on that. And then separately work on the development, which would be both two separate parcels, north of the railroad tracks with the retail and south of the railroad tracks with the commercial buildings. There will be development on both sides of that. But certainly not prepared to move to any, at least me at this point, any vote on this. But I think that as presented to us, you cannot take a capital lease document and structure it as a redevelopment agreement for the betterment of this town and the betterment of a relationship. I think that there's a lot to be gained by everyone working together on this and for all parties involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mason.
First, I think our work session that I was able to attend, because Houston got 40 inches of rain, I thought that was productive, and some of the work that I've seen going into this is pretty impressive. My own questions go back to the air rights now versus in the new agreement. I also have questions on the transferability of the entity once they have it. But what I really still keep hearing, and I think we need to have a kind of a goal and a direction where we're going. I think the first selectman had indicated, send it to the BET, send it to the RTM, let these groups begin working on it. Everybody's got the ability to modify and revisit. But I think the question still comes down to, we have two appraisals. I'm sensing there might be a flavor for a third. I'm not sure. That would require an RFP process, and the steps to do that, I would probably ask our controller that. But I think we need to come out of at least tonight with at least a next step of where we're going in this process. Some people say, we're not ready for voting on this. I agree with that. But I think we need to continue the discussions, have a next step. And it keeps coming back to the value of the property. today versus going forward. And I see that as the common next question.
Mr. Weisbrod.
So, for those who did not attend the workshop, my comments are much simpler, really. I think that we have ample information to vote, maybe not tonight, but at the next meeting, to reject this contract. Not to say that we don't want to redevelop the railroad station. We do, but the current contract has to be started from scratch. It's ill-founded and ill-conceived for several reasons that came across during the workshop. Number one, the assessed value is just an inappropriate way to start the valuation process for a major piece of real estate. That was amply documented by our town assessor. Number two, we never really, or the selectman's office never really engaged an appraisal to begin with. There was no appraisal. There was a restricted appraisal report, which has got all kinds of red flags as to what it really means, and that is not an appraisal that can be used by a bank or any third party. So the valuation is not a valuation. And number three, alternative ideas as far as innovative partnership agreements were rejected early on in the process, never considered, ignored, and as a result, there was a rush to a contract. When you scratch your head and say, what's the rush? There's 37 years left on the lease. If anything here, there's really not a rush. We have time to evaluate this with care and so forth. Let's keep in mind, quite simply, the town of Greenwich owns more than 50% of the real property, those two office buildings, 37 years from today. We own those office, or 53% of those office buildings, 37 years from now. And so we talked about discount rates and so forth, and it's clear to me that the assessments, I won't call them appraisals, used a 10 or 11% discount rate because of the partnership complexities. But for the developer, if the developer were to own 100% of this property, there's no debate that it would be a 6% discount rate, which would multiply the assessment of the value by a factor of 6. So there are many questions here. I think it's not really a difficult one in terms of voting against this contract, starting from scratch, working out a new arrangement. Now, we do have the presence of our first selectman he represented, I'm going to ask him now, he represented at the workshop that he intends to bring this to the RTM regardless of how the BET views this matter. I've heard it said that he has rethought that, and I'll take this opportunity to ask him if he intends to go to the RTM, regardless of how we look at this at the BET, or whether he's changed his mind on that position.
Mr. Tessie, I think that question goes through me to you.
Sure.
So
Good evening, Madam Chairman.
Good evening, Mr. Tessie.
Members of the BET. Just a couple of points. I appreciate the deliberations that you held last week. I think they were constructive. I do think that it's important for me to say on the record, since I do represent the town administration and the professionals who work for it and the people engaged, that the tone and tenor of it on the part of Mr. Weisbrod was unfortunate. It became very interrogatory. I didn't know that this was a judicial body. But that being said, I hope going forward we can treat people with a level of professionalism, show some regulation in temperament and behavior, and recognize that everyone's putting forth their best judgment based upon the professional expertise that they received. And that expertise was received by an outside firm contracted through a law firm. I recognize you don't agree with it, and that's fine. I respect that. You tonight can engage whomever you wish to do so through a prescribed process, request for proposal. So I would encourage you to do that. In terms of the next step, my feeling as someone who's been involved with the BET and the RTM is that the RTM has never been more engaged as it is now. This issue has been in the daylight for several months, and they're eager to weigh in on it. At the same time, I have listened to my professional staff, Mr. Brannion, who I hold in the highest regard, and the proponents who would prefer not to have it go to the RTM, based upon the fact that they want to reconcile the differences with your board, and more importantly, with the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm not going to get into debating point by point, but I do think for the public edification, the best point of departure here is to understand the four parcels, the history, the ownership. I hear Ms. Tarkington talk about the north portion. We don't own the north portion. Ashworth can do as they wish with it. We are talking about the south portion. But those are the type of complexities that I think are going to make it hard when people put that out to make a wise and informed decision. So it will not go to the RTM in October. I made that decision this morning after counseling with Mr. Branyan and Ashworth, and it gives you all the time and willingness to address it in the fashion that you choose.
Thank you, Mr. Tessie. I actually am astonished to hear you say that you didn't know that this board was a judicial body, given that you've seen our agenda, and I know you caucus with my colleagues who seem to want to put themselves in the role of a judicial
Point of order,
board.
that
I
is
know.
totally inappropriate.
Really, I'm
Point of
responding
order,
to.
please.
I'm here
There's
to,
no,
I'm here
Ms.
to talk
Festus.
about the item on the agenda and the question that was posed.
Yes, you made a comment regarding one of my members. I'm responding back to you. And it's not just me. I got some comments
Well, I'm
in from the
basing
side.
my comments not only on Mr. Weisbrod's behavior here, but in his audit committee where he acts very inappropriate with town personnel.
Really? So is that, oh, okay. Thank you so much for sharing your comments.
So I just want the public
Thank you
to
so
know.
much for your comments. Okay. Mr. Drake, you had a comment before? You seated?
My friend who had her hand up first, I think.
I called on you,
happy-
Mr. Drake.
Happy to speak. I don't think we're ready to decide this matter. I think to say that a decline would be polite is just a word. It wouldn't be polite. Let's just, I think the right thing to do is figure out what is the appropriate process, a process that the 12 of us would find appropriate. So think with me for a minute. Well, just to pick a person, let's say Mr. Minarski was the Ashforth people. He's not, but if you were the Ashforth people and you wanted to make a transaction with the town, you'd go see the chief executive of the town and you make a deal. Discussions, you make a deal. And if it had to be submitted to the finance board for approval, you'd submit it to the finance board for approval. And maybe the RTM, and maybe the planning and zoning. But you wouldn't want, I don't think any of the 12 of us would want to see a process where the Ashforth people make a deal with the chief executive, which is the normal representative of the town. And some people say they didn't like that deal, so you can't negotiate it, we'll negotiate it here at these 12.
Mr. Drake, are you commenting on the agreement or on the process?
On the question of voting, I'm saying it would not be appropriate to vote today, and that I'm just asking us, and I'll take another minute, it won't be long, just to say that we should develop among the 12 of us a process that is not a chaotic one, where the Ashforth people negotiate with party one, the deal doesn't work, you negotiate with party two consisting of 12 people, maybe they don't like that and they make a third deal with the RTM. That's chaos that none of us wish. So my recommendation is that when the time comes, if we decline this deal, the new deal is to be negotiated by the chief executive of the town. That's just an orderly process, right?
So let me just
thank you
say-
for Mr. Drake. Thank you, Mr. Drake. Just to be clear, the agreement that was presented to us was the Transportation Center Development Agreement as was negotiated. We're not renegotiating that agreement. We're discussing the terms of that agreement and indicating whether we would support that deal or not. It is not our role to sit here and say, well, you know, I actually don't want 6 theaters, I want 5, and I want something else instead. That's not our job, or we want a different valuation. Our job is to comment on the deal as it was presented to us, give some hopefully guidance of issues that we found with the deal. So I understand that you're not prepared to give that guidance right now, but I think the question is the deal as was presented to us and the workshop and the concerns, the commentary on that. Ms. Tarkington, I believe you spoke already. I'd like to give other people a turn, if you wouldn't mind. I think Ms. Vassiliadis, you haven't spoken on this yet.
Yeah, I'm just for point of clarification, Madam Chairman. The agenda item says discussion on Greenwich Transportation Center redevelopment agreement. It does not call for a vote. Is that correct?
It does not call for a vote, it says discussion.
Okay,
I
so
think it
we
would be
are-
useful, by the way, if we get to the end of the conversation, to get a sense of whether the deal as presented to us is acceptable, okay, before we move on to next steps. If it is an acceptable deal to members, then we don't need to get on to next
Just
steps.
again, as a point of clarification, though, it doesn't say discussion with next steps, it just says discussion. So I guess I'm just trying to clarify what we are trying to achieve here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize the agenda needed to specify discussion of point A, then discussion of point B, and then next steps. Our
I'm-
discussion in our agenda can also include next steps.
Thank you. I was just asking for a point of clarification.
Did that clarify it?
Thank you, it did.
Okay, Ms. Tarkington.
Yes, I'd just like to comment further on one of the comments that Mr. Tessie made, because I mentioned the parcel north of the railroad tracks, which is the retail parcel. I do believe that if you're going to break this up into 4 pieces, there's a capital lease, there's the parcel south of the railroad tracks, the parcel north of the railroad tracks, and the appropriation that the town would make its investment for zero equity in this new project as the public part of it. I think that this is important to note that we are also, we the town, which I believe we have a fiduciary responsibility for on this board, the 3 applications that were made to planning and zoning at the July, whatever it was, end of July 30th meeting or thereabouts, had the town of Greenwich and the GPI, whatever, Greenwich Plaza Inc., as the applicants on this. So therefore, the development is on the north side, and that is why I had said that in my comments. I guess I needed to clarify that to Mr. Tessie and for the public. It's just a very complex transaction. It's, in the end, I think probably be good for all parties, but I just think it needs to be clarified and as I said in my own comments. So that's why I wanted to come back and add that one addition. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tarkington. Are there any other comments that people want? Mr. Weisbrot.
Yeah, I would like to just say a couple of things. The contract that's been signed requires that the BET vote on this matter. So the vote is necessary. Now, the discussion here is at what point do we want to have the vote, what has to be considered, what follow-ups are needed from the workshop. But the contract says, if you read the contract, that a vote of the BET, an affirmative vote of the BET is required. So that's why the vote is an issue. I'm very delighted that Mr. Tessie is changed his view and is agreeing to suspend the presentation to the RTM until this body has an opportunity to assess it. I have to say, I really regret the personal attack that Mr. Tessie chose to make on me this evening. I would only say that if his questions were a little bit more tough-minded, then maybe mine wouldn't have had to be. Thank you.
Further discussion on this item? Oh, yes, Ms. Tarkington.
Make one more comment on that. Normally, a project goes to the RTM after it has gone through the municipal improvement part of P&Z. And the application for the municipal improvement hasn't even yet been heard by planning and zoning. So there is a process element that, from my standpoint, consistency in how we approach our projects, I think, is important. And so since that also came up during the discussion.
Any other comments? Mr. Raymer.
So all due regard for the good points that my friend Mr. Drake said, the difficulty here is that it's a not uncomplicated structure of town government. And so it's a little hard to understand how to take next steps in an efficient way. I agree completely that the normal first approach on a transaction like this begins with the office of the first selectman. By the way, I neglected to say and should have said it was my first remarks, my thanks for a lot of time and effort that the first selectman and his people have put into this transaction. I didn't mean to disparage that by not commenting on that. To my friend David, the contract actually calls for approval from the town required authorities, and authorities is defined as being all governmental and quasi-governmental agencies or officials having jurisdiction over GPI, the town of Greenwich, the Metro North Railroad, ConDOT, or the public benefit improvements. We have an opinion, I believe, from the town attorney that it requires BET approval. I hope I'm quoting the town attorney correctly on this occasion, but I didn't see in the contract. Well, then I've made a mistake. I do think it would be in our interest, in everybody's interest, to try and decide what are the right next steps to move this forward. When I proposed that we bring it to a vote, I didn't necessarily mean tonight, so I offer my nod to my friend Karen with that. I just mean seasonably. I thought that everybody's entitled to a clarity of this particular deal does not seem to have the support from the BET. That may be a wrong statement, but I'm thinking that's where we're going to end up. And if that's the case, I thought we advanced things by having that be declared, so to speak, by a vote, whenever it is that that vote may take place. Then I think smart people, like the Office of the First Selectman, like the chair of the BET and others, should sit down and have a conversation in which we try and reach a decision of what's the right way to get the advice that we need and to address the next steps. My thinking is that a not particularly large committee should be formed to pursue it, but I won't try and speak for those people. I'll let those people speak for themselves in due course. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other comment? I won't comment on how everybody wants to form a committee tonight, but I do think it benefits us to have an idea, at least while we have representatives of the developer in the room, since the agreement that was presented to us is the one that we would have to vote on. We don't have the really authority to draft an alternative agreement. I just want to get a sense whether the agreement as presented is acceptable to any of the BET members so that we can give the developer some idea of where we're going. So if anyone is willing to vote for this agreement at our next meeting, when the vote would be on the agenda as it stands now without change, please indicate. Is that a yes?
I'd like to comment.
Okay, well, I'm asking for an indication and then you can comment. Is there anyone who's willing to vote as is?
If it takes a little courage, sure.
Okay, so
And
one.
I'd like to comment.
That's fine. Just as a sense so that we're not at a place where we're going to vote on this agreement as it stands, and we'll have to figure out what the questions are. So I take your inquiry, Mr. Raymer, and we'll liaise with the First Selectman's office as well, and to figure out what's the best way to compile the BET questions and concerns arising out of the workshop. Mr. Drake, would you like to add something?
I just think that straw vote was no straw. It was real, and I think it's inappropriate at this time.
Thank you for your opinion. Okay, is there any further discussion on this matter? Okay. Hearing none, we're going to move on to the next motion, the next item of new business. Lest there be any doubt, I want to welcome all of our guests this evening that we are in political season. 6 weeks from tomorrow, there's going to be an election, and just about everyone on this dais is facing election. So let's just put the context out there.
Point of order,
on which,
there's no motion
excuse
on the
me,
floor.
Mr. Fox, can you please join us up here for our discussion? Yeah, I just would like to, we have a motion on our agenda. It was added to our agenda by 4 members of the Republican caucus, Mr. Mason, Ms. Hess, Mr. Drake, Mr. Deuce. And the inquiry was to ask the BET chair to form a special committee to investigate the Democratic BET members in relation to Connecticut State Elections Enforcement Commission decisions.
Point of information, there's nothing in our motion that says anything about Democratic members. The email you received on 9/6/19, I can forward, I can give to you if you'd like to read it.
Excuse me, Mr. Mason, I'm still speaking.
But you're
I did not
misstating.
I did not call on you. That it was an agenda item. I'll call on you to make your motion. Mr. Fox, we've had a lot of conversations. I just want to be clear for the body to so that they understand the conversations that we've had about germaneness. So I thought maybe you could do a little discussion about items. I added it to the agenda, as is our policy and procedures, and start off with a conversation about germaneness, and as we discussed.
Can I ask a point of order?
Certainly, Mr. Raymer.
I think under our policy and procedures manual, there's a process whereby one can put forward a motion. There's a time element, 10 days as I recall, and there's been a motion put forward. I would like to ask that the exact motion be read, and then we can entertain conversations about it. But I want the motion to be put on the floor exactly as it was put forward by the 4 members that had made the request.
Having now been asked by several members, we'll delay. Mr. Mason, would you like to make your motion?
I would, thank you. And I want to thank Mr. Raymer for getting his point of order in, because we do need a motion before us. So, Madam Chair, the motion is for the chair of the BET to form a BET committee, and I put special project team because that's our language that we use. My request was that the motion be made exactly as it was put forward more than 10 days ago, because there is no procedure in place to begin to substitute other dialogue. Thank you very much.
Through the chair, I ask the member to please read his motion.
So without your point of order being recognized, I will continue to say that it was submitted to the BET and it wasn't included in our package for handout tonight, which that could be another discussion. Motion for the chair to form a BET committee to investigate the Connecticut State Elections Enforcement Commission complaint and rulings/decisions for the file 2018-008 Alpha, A is in Alpha, and the 2018-008 B as in boy, comma, including the recent actions, any ongoing investigations. The BET committee to be formed by the chair of the BET will meet the minority representation requirements of the Connecticut General Statutes, Section 9-167A. The committee to report back to the full BET at our October 24th, 2019 meeting. Their report should include findings and any ongoing work by the SEEC, State Elections Commission, and recommendations to the BET.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
Yes, I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Mason, seconded by Mr. Drake. Mr. Geiger, I believe, did you have copies of that motion? Yes.
Madam Chair, I will give Catherine a copy.
Excuse me?
I will get Catherine a copy, I promise.
Mr. Geiger has copies of the motion.
Oh, good.
Mr. Fox?
Good evening.
Now we have a motion on the floor. Can
Yes, we
you
do.
please talk about the idea of germaneness?
As part of the process with respect to this motion, I have had the opportunity to have conversations with a number of members of your board. And I have gone back and I have looked at the various rules that are applicable. I've looked at the rules that apply to your board. I've looked at comparable rules as they apply to the Board of Selectmen. As I've indicated to a number of you, there is one very distinct difference. As I think was referenced by Mr. Raymer, found on page 18 of your rules, there is a process by which an item gets on the agenda. And it requires the request from 4 members. It requires a timing within 10 days prior to your meeting, and then it is put on the agenda. It is very broad. It is not limited. It does not discuss what may or may not be germane. It is different from what we find in Section 217 of our charter, which relates to our Board of Selectmen. Under subsection B of that provision, it provides that upon 5 days written notice to the first selectman, either of the 2 selectmen may place an item on the agenda of a meeting, which item shall be germane to the duties and responsibilities of the Board of Selectmen. That is more narrow, in my opinion, more limited, in my opinion, and it restricts much more the provisions that you have. Yours are very broad, and basically anything that 4 members wish to have on the agenda gets on the agenda as long as it's filed in a timely manner. Now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. I think we're going to have further discussion, but I
That's
just
fine.
wanted to give a little background on,
Sure.
on germaneness. I do want to, I did have a question actually for you, though, before we get into discussion of this motion, and it really had to do with your time, right? Because you're very busy. How much time would you say you've spent so far on the this Republican motion?
I would say,
Again, point of order, what has this got to do with the motion in hand?
It is.
You know, again.
It has to do with Mr. Fox's time. Your point of order is not recognized, Mr. Fox. How much time would you say you've had on this motion?
I would say, roughly speaking, there have been a number of phone calls. There have been a number of meetings with members of your board. There have been meetings within my office to discuss the procedural issues. There have been emails back and forth, which I have reviewed. There have been a review in particular of Robert's rules, what is applicable, what is germane, what is not, how they would apply.
Right.
There's been time spent in trying to anticipate, which I try to do, questions that I expect may be raised with me on a given evening such as this. I never get them all, but I try to get most of them.
Right.
I would say, reasonably speaking, I've spent something in the area of 10 hours.
10 hours. And I'm sorry, remind me your rate again.
It's the 1977 rates of $250 an hour.
So who's a mathematician? So far about 10 hours, not including this evening, I guess, right?
I think
At
that's fair, yes,
$250 an hour so far on this motion.
I think that's accurate.
Without getting to the actual merits of the motion and when we start actually deliberating
Money
on
well
the
spent.
actual motion. Thank you. We'll come back to you, I'm sure, about questions about how extensive germaneness is.
That's fine.
But Mr. Mason, would you like to
Ju-
explain the foundation for your motion?
I would, but I actually would like to ask the town attorney a question first.
Yes, sir.
Did you bill the town any extra for this time, or did you do it in the keeping of your normal contract?
It would be within my normal contract.
Thank you very much.
So if it's in your normal contract, you have up to a certain number of hours? How does
No.
that work then?
I bill the town, and the agreement we have is I bill them on the hours that I spend.
You bill the town based
For
on
the hours that I
For the
spend.
hours. So when you say in your normal contract, what does that mean?
I think the question raised by Mr. Mason was there any additional time different from the normal process that we follow? And the answer to that is no.
Meaning that the time you spend on this would presumably take away from time you spend on something else? I don't think I understand. If you bill by the hour, the 10 hours you spent on this,
Would be billed in the normal course of events.
so you're billing the time?
That is correct.
Right, so this is billed time to the town. The town has to pay for these 10 hours?
That is also correct.
Okay, right. That's how I understood it. Mr. Mason, would you like to present your motion?
Thank you very much. You mean the discussion on the motion?
Well, your rationale for the motion.
The complaint filed with the SEC, I'm sure everybody knows what that is, dates
No,
back to
I'd actually like you to be specific, please.
Thank you, thank you. State Elections Enforcement Commission. Dates back to February of 2018, some 19 months ago. Since then, the State Elections Enforcement Commission has adjudicated at least 2 persons involved, and the word is that the other 5 BET members involved may also have reached a settlement with the state. The discussions with the SECC, the State Elections Enforcement Commission, are just that. This item has been in the local news and covered heavily in social media and opinion letters. This has the voters interested. The motion before us seeks to have us, the BET, look into the matter in an open, transparent manner and offer the opportunity for the residents and all parties involved to hear the facts, understand the potential impacts to the workings of the BET. So those who may believe what they have heard and read will have the opportunity to restore their public trust in the most important body of our town government. Thank you.
Do you have the letters to the editor that you're referring to? The letters to the editor?
I do not.
Oh, so you don't have the authors of the letters to the editor that you're referring to?
I do not.
Oh.
And I did mention social media, and I don't have those either.
You don't have the authors of the social media in terms of which
Point of order,
political
is this-
persuasion?
I answered that
Attorney,
question
answer
already,
the-
Madam Chair. Did you not understand it? I can
did
repeat
not
the answer.
I did not understand it, actually. In fact, I'm trying to keep a straight face. So you don't know who the social media proponents of this claim is, and you don't know who actually wrote the letters, but it is of great public import, so let's have the discussion. I know you have some prepared
So I know you're
remarks, so
trying
go
to
right
handle
ahead.
this meeting, so you say I don't know who they are, but that wasn't your question. Your question to me was, do you have them?
Oh, so
And my
do you-
answer was no.
Oh.
You asked me,
Do
do
you-
I know who they are? You did not ask
I'm
that question,
sorry
and
if
I
I
don't
missed-
think that's,
okay.
quote, germane to the authority and the power that we have to do this. Remember, this, going back to 4 members adding something to the agenda, I voted against that because I knew that this would have an impact later on. But what's before you has no political party, has nothing to do with that. It's just for this body, which we all know is one of the most highly revered body in this town, does the work of the town, is responsible for fiscal authority, keeping in mind on the, quote, store. And this is a better conversation in our public forum. We have to work together. As one of your members said to me on the phone, this is a detriment to the workings of the BET. I could not agree more. But instead of this carrying on in the manner that it has been, and I look at some of the comments made before this item was even on our agenda, this is not good for the town. The town needs to air this out in a very transparent way. I am not the SEC. I don't know their workings. I was not part of the complaint, nor were the 4 people that are on this motion. But the motion that you have before you is nothing to do with the details of the incident. There's nothing to do with it. It's just a motion to form a committee to do an investigation in a transparent manner. That's what's before you.
This is your motion, actually, and I'm going to rephrase my question. I'm sorry you didn't understand my colloquialism, but can you please identify the authors of the letters to the editor and the social media posts that you have indicated are the triggers for this conversation?
I could. The conversation on this is over. This is not, you're going somewhere that is good for what you want to do. I'm just telling you, this is.
So you can, but you won't identify. I just want to be clear.
I didn't say that. You did.
No. So can you please identify the authors of the letters to the editor? Mr. Mason, you have the floor.
You're going to tell me if I give you the answer you want to hear, right?
I'm not
Thank you.
sure who you're referring to, so you're saying there's a public interest. I'm just asking you, who wrote the letters? It's fine. Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Mr. Raymer.
Anybody who thinks this is a good moment for the BET, please raise your hand. I mean, I think that this is the whole chemistry of the meeting today, the whole making of this motion, every bit of it.
Jeff, is your mic on?
My mic is on. Am I not talking into it enough? I'll lean forward in case anybody actually wants to hear this. I've been on this board for 12 years. I got to say, I think this is the lowest moment that I've ever experienced. I thought the moments generally, thought this maintained at a very high level. I'm critical of this motion. I was the person that Mr. Mason was referring to. I've known Mr. Mason a long time. He and I can disagree on things, and we managed to do it without coming to blows with each other. But I was very critical of the motion. And I was very frank with him about it. There is a state agency that is statutorily authorized to hear matters of this kind. It is the only agency that is statutorily authorized. There's no jurisdiction in any other agency to be hearing those matters. That agency is the State Elections Enforcement Commission. It's charged with the responsibility to investigate. It has the power to compel testimony. It has the power to issue subpoenas. It has the ability to punish as appropriate. And again, it is the only agency that is charged in that way. And that agency did, in fact, take jurisdiction of those issues. It did conduct an investigation. It did compel testimony, and it has meted out punishment. And those punishments, those findings of fact, those conclusions of law are all reduced to writing and are available to every single person in this room. They're on the website. You can have it. If anybody doesn't know what they say, I have written copies with them that I would allow them to take a look at the end of this meeting. It is all there in black and white. It has been dealt and finished with. It in itself is not a great moment for this BET, but there is nothing further that this body needs to do. The charter is explicit that the BET has only certain powers. It has the powers granted to it by the charter. There is nowhere in the charter that it has the power to censure, suspend, or expel or otherwise punish a member. So the investigation that you're looking for comes to no conclusion. It has no ability to infringe upon the ability of the other elected members to serve here. There's no grant of power under the charter to compel testimony or to issue subpoenas. All those tools of investigation have not been granted to this body by the charter, so this body does not have that power. The charter is explicit that 7 members constitute a quorum. Robert's rules is explicit that unless you have the 7 members, you have no power to act. If you start a meeting with 7 members and you lose your quorum, you lose your power to act. If all of the members that are charged in the, or referred to in the comments of Mr. Mason were to say that I'm going to recuse myself from action because I have an interest in the outcome of what's being sought, then this body suddenly loses its power to act, is now reduced to 6 members. And if it has 6 members, if it only has 6 members, it doesn't have a quorum, it has no power to act. The motion asked for the appointment of a committee with some members who are Republicans and some members who are Democrats. If the Democratic members recuse, the ability to grant the relief that's being sought by the motion becomes impossible. Our policy and procedures manual says that there is such a thing as special projects teams. The special project teams, according to our policy and procedures manual, only come into existence by in one way, and that is in the discretion of the chair. There's nothing in our process that allows for motions to force the chair to exercise her judgment to create a special projects team that in her judgment she thinks is not in the interest of the BET. And most importantly, you have to react to the terrible atmosphere that you're seeing in this room and thinking this is not good for the town. This is political. It's happening in a political year. I regret that there are these SEC complaints. Nobody sought them. It was a terrible series of events that led to them, and they are certainly a regrettable moment. But what we are doing here tonight is worse, much worse. It poisons the ability of this body to work as a coherent body, administering the finances of this town. We need to grow up and do better than this. This motion was a mistake. I understand the politics of the moment, but you have reduced yourself to a very low level that I think is regrettable. Those are my remarks. Later on, I want to say something about the changes that are being recommended by the town attorney, and I'll come back to that later, but I didn't want to detract from these remarks by addressing that now.
Thank you, Mr. Raymer. Mr. Fox, I had another question for you that was prompted by Mr. Raymer's comments. Sorry to make you get up and down. It's going to happen a couple times. Mr. Raymer talked about the poisoned atmosphere, and I'm just wondering whether you counseled anyone about the impact of this motion prior to making the motion.
I've talked to several people. I think it would be inappropriate for me to say what I counseled people on or spoke to them about, especially since a number of them asked me to keep in confidence. I would say, in terms of the big picture and my obligation to the town, I recognize that in terms of the functioning of any institution, such as this, I try to avoid, when I can, confrontation between the members. To the extent that that can be avoided, I always try to accomplish. And I try to recommend that to the people I deal with.
Thank you.
Thank you. And do you think that this kind of motion triggers confrontation such that it would be best for the town to have avoided it?
I recognize my role. I recognize that I do not have a vote. I recognize that I do not have the right to indicate to you folks what you should do with motions before you. As I indicated previously, to the extent that we can avoid confrontation and conflict, it makes the institutions function better in the long run. And I would hope to accomplish that in whatever small way I can.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fox. Further discussion on this motion?
Should I be speaking to the changes at this
No,
point?
Mr. Weisbrod?
So, I have not served on this board as long as others, but I do take note of Mr. Raymer's comments. To me, this is a dreadfully low point for a group. Let's remember, each one of us here is a volunteer serving this town to contribute whatever expertise we may have to help the town in an area where we're not getting paid. And, you know, the saying goes, there's no such thing as a Democratic or a Republican pothole. And the idea of doing what, let's call it constitutional hardball, you know, where you take a strict letter of the law, all right? So there's a strict letter that says, okay, we can put this motion in, to subvert, it can subvert the spirit of trust and cooperation among a group of volunteers that are serving the town. And it damages the body in a way that is difficult to repair. And what it does is ratchets up reaction from the other side. There's a lot of discussion in this town or in this country, too, about norms and about adhering to norms. And once we give up on our norms, we give up on much more than that. We really do give up on the fabric of democracy, as it were. To my mind, this motion, this political stunt, it's so clear, is a violation of the norms that we all would like to abide by. In a democracy, the hallmark is that a party that loses gracefully. It is the whole idea that you transition from one group to another group. And when that happens, it's painful if you're committed to a point of view, but it's only when that happens with grace and in a spirit of trust and friendship that you really can maintain a democracy. My colleagues on the VET, my Republican colleagues on the VET, wrote an op-ed in which they commented on this, and they certainly have the right to do that. But in that op-ed, they said, and I'm quoting, "We could have understood an unintentional omission or even a mistake," unquote. That's a fair point. Had the backers of this political stunt taken the time to think about what's in the settlement, which will be available, it's now public, they will see that the SEC, in its own words, said as much, that this is an unintentional act, that those of us who were involved, certainly regret, but it was unintentional, and call it a mistake. But the spirit of this is to create a wedge, to create a stunt, to use something in a way that really violates the trust and spirit of a community of volunteers. That's all I wanted to say for now.
Ms. Cromick?
My concern is that there has been a real rush to judgment before you had the decision of SEEK in your hands. There is a decision. It applied to 5 of us, and there are separate decisions that are already up on their website. The one that applies to the 5 of us should be up there any day. We're waiting to see it pop up on their website. We were investigated by a state agency. And if you don't think that all of us took the seriousness of that proceeding, then you don't know any of us. It is one of the most embarrassing and saddening moments, certainly in my life, as someone who's given service as a volunteer to this community. And I apologize. I apologize because I didn't carry out the review of the laws that applied, the statutes that applied, in a way that, and question them in a way, in the moment, when an election was going on, and we were all rushing to that election day. It was a mistake, but it was an honest one. We acknowledged that there was an unintentional failure to file a form. We've been penalized by the SEEC, as you all know. But I honestly believe that this community needs more from us. We need to get back to the business of the BET. SEEC has completed its investigation, but I truly believe it is disingenuous of our colleagues to seek to play this out for another few months. It appears to be a very political action at a moment when we are seeking to move toward an election. But in my mind, as a member of the BET of the town of Greenwich, the important issues right now are our environment. What are we doing for climate change? It's our infrastructure. Why do we have buildings that that are not up to code with the Americans for Disabilities Act? Where are our priorities? Public safety. Should there be a Northwest Fire Station? I'm not really sure, but it's certainly part of what we ought to be focused on. Our plan of conservation and development that's coming out, it's in draft form, but there is a lot of work that this board, that this community, that all of the boards and commissions in this community need to be focusing on. And I, for one, do not want to spend the next 6 months playing out a political game. I'm here to work for the residents of this community, for the taxpayers of our town. And I ask my colleagues to please withdraw this motion and let us work together to do the very business that we were elected by the town residents and the town voters to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kromick. Further discussion on this motion? Ms. Moriarty, did you want to, or I actually have some questions on the motion since it's directed towards me. Okay. Before, the motion is for the chair to form a BET committee to investigate and to report back in 32 days. So please advise, as I'm thinking about this committee, what it is that you envision the committee will actually be doing in 32 days. I would. One of your
I believe
colleagues.
this is a fair question, and I thank you. And I'll start out with, being that we're going to talk about environment and our answers, I will start out with saying how I think before Mr. Raymer even spoke, I think we had agreed on the byproduct of this together. And I appreciate his comments, and I think David Weisbrod said the same thing. So this committee, as I understand it, will look, first of all, there's a significant package, obviously, from the submittal to the SEEC, if I can use the abbreviation. I think that the conversation that still exists is, what are our goals? The goals are, how do we stop this going forward in town? I think the next thing that would be is a series of dialogue on the timeline for this. You know, I'm hearing all of the, I'll use the word that I don't like, I'm hearing the political attack, and I'll respond to that. We didn't consider it anything but politics when the campaigns and the picnics were going on and the money was being spent, and there was certainly an illusion of, wow, this is incredible. I would say I wish we had that kind of resources to do that, but we didn't. So it started political, and tonight's event is not something, I'm going to use the word again, the Republicans, there was only 4 members who submitted that as per our rules, although we're all in support of it, but it wasn't the Republicans making tonight's problem. It was the actions during the election, filing of forms with the state and doing one thing and saying one thing and doing another. But with that said, I would ask the committee to hold, obviously, sit-down sessions. These conversations that we're having right now, Ms. Kromick, besides drifting off the subject, I think your comments there were well-founded. I'd love to expand on those. But I think between the dialogue between The SEC, there will be, hopefully, 3 documents. There's 2 currently now on the SEC webpage. I know that the third one's in draft and it might not be approved yet by the SEC, but I think we'll take the working documents from there. There seems to be one other subject that has caught the attention, and that is the subject of, while this was going on, who was privy to this and what the conversations were about sharing the cost, et cetera. There seems to be a disagreement even in the newspaper reports on that from comments from members on this board, not from us.
Mr. Mason, I asked you what you expected the committee
So I think
to accomplish.
I think the committee will sit down and go through that information and report back to the BET on the incidents that happen, the recommendations to the BET, how we can prevent this from happening again and moving forward. And that's, I think, the only transparent, we're the only board that can do this in the town, and this is how I envision the committee to work.
So, from what I'm hearing, I just want to be clear, since it's a direction to the chair, you want a committee to read the SEC opinions and back up and deliberate on it and come up with their own recommendations for the BET.
Not quite, Madam Chair. The SEC does not recommend to the town of Greenwich things that they can do to prevent this in the future. They don't do that in the 2 that I've seen so far. They have nothing to do with the workings of Greenwich and how the political parties can amend their rules or any of that, or their charter or anything for this. So, no, I can't say that. I can answer that question for you.
So you want the committee to come up with recommendations that will prevent, I'm not sure what, actually. So I'm still not exactly clear on what the committee is supposed to accomplish, and in 32 days, which, you know, given all the stuff that we're going on and how long it takes us to do things, that's quite optimistic, but I appreciate it. And in the interest of transparency, I think this is a good.
Are you making a motion to change the responding date?
I'm not making a motion now. I'm processing it. It's a direction to the chair. I am interested in full discussion and transparency, actually, and so I will see whether anybody else has any questions or comments on this motion. Mr. Weisbrod, did you have something to say?
No, I'm just sort of scratching my head. I mean, you know, we have the State Election Enforcement Committee. They're empowered by the state law to investigate such matters. They have looked at this in an exhaustive way over the last 2 years. They have come up with their conclusions. It's in the public domain. The BET, as far as I know, does not have subpoena power, does not have the ability to compel testimony. If you're proposing that there be a new investigation to supplant that of the SEC, I'm not sure that it's legally able to do that. The matter has been asked and answered. I request that you look at the adjudication on the website, and if you have any further questions, then, you know, proceed and inquire, file another complaint with the SEC, do whatever you want. That's the forum. And so bringing it here is so transparent. It's really beneath you guys to do this. I honestly think more of you, I would have thought that you'd have a little more cleverness than this, but that's my view.
Ms. Moriarty. Oh, Mr. Turner, did you want to? Ms. Moriarty, Ms. Turner, Ms. Moriarty.
I yield to the.
No, Mr. Turner, go right ahead.
Yes. So, first, let me acknowledge the candor in my ensuing comments. It's important that I mince no words and to be professional. Again, acknowledge the candor. I've read the settlement agreement with the State Election Enforcement Commission by the other BET Democrats. Believe me, I've read mine. I've read the one that was published today, and I've listened very closely to the statements here tonight, and I have a very different experience. And it's clear to me that all the facts are not out yet. More on this in just a minute. The motion, if it's passed, provides for getting to the bottom of the total fact picture. of the 2017 campaign, something that has yet to be done. The people have yet to hear the truth, and the people deserve the truth. 20 years ago, I founded a company here in Greenwich that provided online regulatory software. My clients were the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Reserve Bank, and those they regulated. I invented the software. I have 2 patents on part of the code and was the first to provide insider trading detection to the street. I sold that company 2 years ago to the largest private equity software company in the world. Tony knows compliance. Noting that our state's complex campaign finance laws, I proactively contacted and continuously communicated with our state's most senior campaign compliance attorneys, not only during the entire 2007 BET campaign, but immediately upon its genesis. SEEK noted that my actions to campaign for majority control were the first of their kind. I communicated the equivalent of every other business day on 12 different aspects of the campaign. The financial aspects of the campaign were either known by, pre-approved by SEEK, or included suggestions from their communication in writing to be compliant. Specific literature and flyers that are noted in the complaint, along with attribution guidance, were again pre-approved by SEEK. All of this activity is evidenced in SEEK's compliance logging technology and available to anyone upon request. I followed their advice in every way, again as evidenced in their logging technology and available to anyone upon request. My fellow candidates in that race have all denied to SEEK their degree of involvement and knowledge of the campaign activities and of the campaign spending. I proactively kept them informed or sought their approval or both on numerous items and kept them informed on the equivalent of a daily business day basis during the campaign for majority. The degree of knowledge and involvement are recorded in emails and are material. For example, on September 20th at 4:41 p.m. in the afternoon, I sent an email to my team members saying the following: I've been giving some serious thought to getting a treasurer, forming a campaign committee, and doing some mailings. My desire to this stems from my belief that the more we have pushing and knocking on voters' doors and from different communication mediums with complementary, if not duplicative messages, the greater chance of Democrats winning in at least one race, maybe 2 or 3. I haven't decided yet, but if you hear something about this, I want you to have no surprises. I've spoken to no one about this but you all, for your information, as I wanted you to be the first to know. This email went to all 5 of my campaign colleagues. On Sunday, September 24th at 11:50 a.m. in the morning.
Mr. Turner, Turner, are you planning on reading all of the emails this
No.
evening? Okay,
No.
I'm just curious. That might be part of the committee's work.
Sunday, September 24th, 11:51 a.m. From Tony Turner to Jill Oberlander. Hi, keeping you in on this. Attached is going out sometime this coming week. Let's you and I talk about campaign, etc. around the 4 p.m. meeting today. Tony Turner to my fellow candidates. Subject is team photograph, September 26, 11:15 in the morning. I suggest we have a team photograph of all candidates for one of the mailers. This will have a different feel to it, more personal and versus the standard headshot. Okay? Question mark.
Mr. Turner, I'm going to ask you to get to your point.
I'm doing that. Sunday, October 1st. Tony, to my fellow candidates.
That is the question. Are you addressing the motion, or are you just reading your emails and no one's response into the record?
I'm addressing the motion.
Okay, so how are you addressing the motion?
I'm addressing the motion in that I think it should pass, and I'm giving you the reasons why.
So the reason, you don't have to read the emails into the record.
I'm not reading all the emails. I have some of them.
How many of them?
I don't know, and it doesn't matter.
It actually does matter to the members here at the BET.
From Tony to my fellow members, October 1st, 3:30 in the afternoon. Dear team, I wanted to compare notes with each of you on this. Does the list below basically hit all the key focus points and issues for Democrats across all ages in town? Question mark. I list them. Please let me know your thoughts. I have thick skin, so let her rip if I'm off base. Jill Oberlander to Tony Turner, October 2nd, 5:50 p.m., copy to the entire committee. I'm in, she said. Later, I write to say, after we all met in candidates last week, I've spent a great deal of time with SEEK on how to campaign and promote voting all Democrats and down the ballot for the BET. It's going to be expensive, and it's going to be a heavy lift. Tony Turner, October 3rd, to David Weisbrod and Jill Oberlander, copied my fellow colleagues. Oh, by the way, the $1,000 paid directly to a vendor, such as a printer and so forth, as part of your campaign expenditures should be done that way and not a contribution to another campaign. Sorry to have omitted this earlier. Mr. Weisbrod responds, this is a great idea. Tony Turner.
Okay, Mr. Turner.
Wednesday.
Mr. Turner,
Yes, Ms. Oberlander.
wrap up your comments, please. Without reading the rest of your emails, if you'd like to distribute them to the BET, that is more than fine.
Madam Chairman, I'm going to
I believe
continue-
actually they may have already been part of the SEEC file, which if the committee is approved, presumably they will look at. So if you have anything to wrap up, please go right ahead. Otherwise, I will move on to Ms. Moriarty and other people who have comments on the motion.
If your ruling is that I cannot continue to support the motion based on the facts, which the public does not know yet, then I will appeal the decision of the chair to let me speak. What's your pleasure?
So I will ask Mr. Fox whether a comment on a motion involves reading all of his emails out loud.
I'm not reading all of my emails.
Reading a number of his emails in. This is a case of first impression for me. I'm going to defer to you. I know we're at $2,500 on this case already. Let's see where we go with that.
I think the question is, it would appear as though, please correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Chairman, that you are going to make a ruling with respect to his continuing on. As I understand Mr. Turner, he is going to appeal the ruling of the chair. I think that would then go to the body as to what it wishes to do with respect to your ruling.
So the question would be whether the reading of his emails is germane to the motion, right? Is that if I were to make a ruling, it would be that the reading of his emails is not germane to whether or not the committee should, the board should ask the BET chair to form a special committee.
That certainly could be a ruling, Madam Chairman, yes.
Right, and that would be the question of his appeal.
He would, as I understand what he is saying, he would then take an appeal from that ruling, and then it will be up to this body to decide whether they sustained your ruling or overruled it.
Right. So since the motion is to form a special committee, let me use the language, to form a BET committee to investigate the complaint rulings and decisions, including the actions and ongoing investigations. All of the emails that would have been submitted are part of the file, would be subject to that committee. I see no reason to read them in right now, actually, and I'm going to rule it out of order.
I appeal the decision of the chair.
Second.
Okay. So now what happens next?
You mean you don't know as chairman of the BET?
I'm asking the lawyer.
This would be controlled under Section 256 of Robert's Rules. A motion to appeal the ruling of the chair is debatable. It is not amendable. It requires a majority vote. The appropriate motion would be, shall the decision of the chair be sustained?
Okay.
A yes vote sustains the ruling of the chair. A no vote overrules the ruling of the chair.
Okay, so the motion was to rule out of order the reading in of the emails because they're contained in the file that would be the subject of the complaint, right? So, sorry, the subject of the committee's work, if it were approved. And now we have a motion by Mr. Turner, seconded, was it by Mr. Mason? Seconded by Mr. Mason to appeal the ruling of the chair. So now we have it open to discussion.
It's debatable.
Debate, you said debatable, right?
debatable.
Right,
It is
so it's
debatable, that's
open
correct.
to discussion.
Robert's, if I may, Robert's rule specifies, I believe, that on an appeal, each member may speak once.
That is correct.
The limitation does not apply to the chair. The chair can speak more than once, most particularly to respond to questions she may be asked about her ruling. Do I
That is
have
also
right?
correct, you do.
Anyone want to speak on this motion? Mr. Mason?
I will have to say that I'm agreeing with, they are germane because we haven't seen the files of those. You may have, but we have not, so I am not really sure what emails are included in the state filing at this point.
I'd like to point that out that Mr. Turner's only reading select emails, so you're not actually getting the full file. Mr. Drake, did you want to say something? You're moving
Yes,
closer
I
to your
would.
microphone.
I think the facts are that the scrutiny that's been applied to the gentleman certainly has earned for him the right to say what he wishes in a public forum.
Any further discussion? Okay, so then I'm going to call for a a name vote on the motion to appeal the ruling of the chair. No?
Wayne had a different.
The motion would be to sustain the ruling of the chair.
Sorry. Motion to sustain.
Just for,
Mr. Weisbrod?
Ask my colleagues on this board to think very carefully before they vote on this matter, on this motion. Remember, we're all volunteers. We're here in front of the public. We're trying to attract people to civic responsibility. And we all agree this is a poor showing for the BET, that's for sure. But if you really want to attract competent people who have professional skills to serve their community, then you vote in this fashion to support this, this farce, really. So I ask you to think carefully of the consequences of the vote that you're taking here and what it means in terms of the decorum, the trust, and in fact, the very role that we have here as volunteers on this finance board. Think about that before you vote. Thank you.
just for clarity's sake, Madam Chairman, so everyone understands what they are doing, a yes vote sustains the ruling of the chair. Your order will enter as a matter of final determination. A no vote would overrule the ruling of the chair.
Okay.
Sorry, say that again.
A yes vote
A yes
sustains?
vote sustains the ruling of the chair. If you want to agree with the chair, your vote is yes. If you want to agree with Mr. Turner, your vote is no.
And let it be clear, I am perfectly happy for everybody to read all of the emails, everybody's email, actually. I encourage people to send requests for everybody's emails. It's totally fine with me. I just don't think that we need to do it right now in this motion. Ms. Vasiliotis, did you want to add something?
No, I was just going to ask Wayne exactly what he stated.
Okay. So, Ms. Vasiliotis, on the motion to sustain the ruling of the chair.
No.
Mr. Turner?
No.
Ms. Tarkington?
No.
Mr. Raymer?
Yes.
Ms. Crumick?
Yes.
Ms. Moriarty?
Yes.
Mr. Mason? Mr. Drake? Mr. Weisbrod?
No.
Ms. Hess is a no, and Mr. Deuce is a no. What a surprise. And I'm going to vote to sustain my motion, but that is a 5-7 vote, and the motion to sustain has failed. So, Mr. Turner, keep reading.
I'd be delighted to. Continuing to support the motion and continuing to talk to the denial of my fellow candidates about their knowledge and involvement of the campaign. I will continue reading as follows. Wednesday, October 4th at 7:37 in the morning. Email to my fellow candidate members. Hi team. Looks like everyone is in, though I still need to give Jeff the plan and details today. Friday this week is a graphic designer deadline. For this, we need attribution language from each of you as to how it should read on postcards, letters, etc. Before anything goes out, I will send it along, only for material edits, of course. Please send me your attribution language by the end of Friday. From Tony to Leslie Moriarty, October 4th, 10:24 in the morning. Copy to my fellow colleagues. Hi, everyone. Attached is the 2017 Municipal Candidate Election Guide. The attribution requirements start on page 45 and are quite simple. From Ms. Oberlander to Tony Turner, copies to everyone. I'm not going to be able to focus on this. I'm sure that whatever Leslie wants to do and decides is fine with me. My address is as follows. From Tony to Leslie Moriarty, copying my entire campaign colleagues. Invitation to a conference call regarding campaign strategy at 10 a.m. today. Here's the meeting number, here's the meeting access code, here's the password and the phone number.
Excuse me, Mr. Turner, I have a question for Mr. Fox. I've been told that there's a limit to how long, under Robert's rules, any member can speak on a motion. It's a point of order. And I guess we'll have to run the tape to see exactly how long Mr. Turner has been speaking. But are you familiar with that limitation?
And there's nothing in our policy and procedure manual.
Yes, which means that Robert's rules applies. So, Mr. Turner, I'm going to put a pause for a second. I might ask Don in the booth whether he has a running time, so that if we do in fact find this limitation, people are calling in, we will have at least the right answer. But in the meantime, if you want to keep going, Tony, please keep going.
Just as a point of clarification, when the RTM rules on speakers, they take up a motion to limit the time for debate. I'm not aware of any time limitation, and there has been no such motion that has been made and seconded and passed by this board.
Yeah, we'll see whether there's a motion requirement or not. I don't know. I'm just referring to someone's comment. I'm asking Mr. Fox for clarification.
May I continue?
Yes, I said you can continue while we're looking. But I guess I should put on my
I
stopwatch.
think I have probably provided enough information, and there's plenty more, up to this point to validate the falsehoods that are in the Sikh settlement agreement with my fellow colleagues, to validate that their knowledge and involvement in the campaign was material. I was the rookie. It was my first campaign in the state, and I was proactively helping everyone. These are all veteran participants in campaigning, and they had a responsibility for their own campaign compliance. They knew what campaign cost. A townwide campaign in a competitive race in Greenwich has previously cost over $200,000. And in the last election cycle, our two Senate candidates spent over $300,000 each. Again, veteran campaigners know what campaigns cost. Never once was I questioned about any aspect of the campaign. I find the allegation that I suppressed information on what was being spent, when and how, I find that laughable. All you had to do was Look at the campaign filings in the town clerk's office. And most of us are in this building every day.
Mr. Turner, you were speaking to facts underlying the motion.
Can I offer, as an assistant to the town attorney, that section 43 states, in a non-legislative body or organization that has no special rule relating to the length of speeches, a member having obtained the floor while a debatable motion is immediately pending can speak no longer than 10 minutes unless he is given the consent of the assembly. I'm reading from Robert's rules. I don't know whether my colleague has talked for more than 10 minutes or not.
Well, I move that we offer consent to speak for more than 10 minutes.
I'll second that.
So we have a motion to offer consent that Mr. Turner speak. Ms. Vasiliotis, are you expecting him to speak for any length of time that he'd like?
I have no time limit.
Okay, for an unlimited, we have a motion, and Ms. Tarkington, is that what you're seconding? An unlimited time limit. I'm just going to unlimited time limit for Mr. Turner for this, for his remarks. I'm going to take a show of hands on this one.
Well, it's a debatable motion.
Oh, okay, thanks. We'll have discussion on the motion.
Well,
Mr. Raymer, would you like to comment?
It had seemed to me that Mr. Turner was indicating that he's done. It seems to me the point is moot, unless Mr. Turner thinks he's not done.
I am not done.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood.
Would anyone like to comment on the unlimited length of remarks?
Just let me clarify, if I might,
Okay.
Madam Chairman. Under the section found on section 43, page 387 of Robert's Rules, in a non-legislative body or organization that has no special rule relating to the length of speeches, a member having obtained the floor while a debatable motion is immediately pending can speak no longer than 10 minutes unless he obtains the consent of the assembly. Such permission can be given by unanimous consent or by means of a motion to extend the limits of debate, which requires a 2/3 vote without debate. So the motion has been made. It is now without debate.
So if we need, I don't think we're going to have unanimous consent on that.
Two-thirds vote.
So 2/3 votes, which means I guess I need a name vote. So we have a motion to allow Mr. Turner unlimited time to speak, made by Ms. Vasiliotis, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Mr. Deuce.
Yes.
Ms. Hess.
Yes.
Mr. Weisbrot.
No.
Yes.
Mr. Drake is a yes. Mr. Mason is a yes. Ms. Moriarty.
No.
Ms. Crumick.
No.
Mr. Raymer.
I said no.
Yeah. Ms. Tarkington.
Yes.
Mr. Turner.
Yes.
Ms. Vasiliotis.
Two-thirds.
Yeah. So, so right now, we are 7. Yeah, it's not going to be 2/3 even with 6.
Mr.
Yeah, 7-5 with 1. All right, I'm sort of on the fence on this one, actually.
Madam Chairman, I only have 4 more minutes to go if you would.
Only 4 more minutes. You know what? Go right ahead, Tony. I'm actually going to vote and give you time to talk. Why not? But I guess I'm going to rethink that. 4 more minutes?
Yes.
Okay. 4 more minutes.
All you had to do was look at the campaign filings at the town clerk's office showing all campaign activities and expenditures. They're there for anyone to see. I find the actions of my fellow members and their denial of their involvement shameful. Now one of them has said in the press that I misled her, and that the State Election Enforcement Commission has acknowledged I did. Nothing could be further from the truth, because the written record of the seat compliance logging system shows otherwise. I followed their direction perfectly. It seems that rather getting to the bottom of the truth, either at the SEEK or in this body or both, some of us on this dais are choosing to sell others out to buy their political future. The real misleading is around those that are refusing to give the total facts to the people.
There is vigorous degree of pushback on this motion, as has been evidenced tonight. A real fight is going on here like I have never seen. This is my 5th rodeo. If you are innocent, then act like it. Give the people the facts.
Don't shout.
That's what this is about.
Don't shout.
I can't apologize for passion. In what world is withholding information and misrepresenting the facts okay? Not in Greenwich, Connecticut that I moved to 29 years ago. Not the BET that I joined almost 3 years ago. And not the RTM that I served on 3 years ago or the New Lebanon Building Committee. I know of no world in which this is okay. I vigorously fought the allegations. I'm sickened by the sheer lack of accountability and transparency proven by the members of our State Election Commission and my colleagues. Because we've yet to have the truth, the facts from all the sources, we're bogged down. We cannot get on with the business of the town. Real leaders would have dealt with this in a very different way. One more minute, Madam Chairman. The dividing line between party politics and principles, that's what this motion is about. It's about moral values and the truth. It's about why we are here. Are we here for personal political gain at any cost, or are we about serving our fellow man through and based on values and principles? That's what this vote is about. We must remind ourselves that the truth never wavers. It's about whether or not you believe the truth is worth it, and I do, and it's about whether or not you are committed to it. The truth requires a commitment. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Weisbrod.
So, I apologize to anybody from the public who has to sit through this nonsense, and I particularly apologize to anybody who wants to volunteer to serve on a town board. I've served on a town board for 25 years, and I've never seen something so utterly crazy as what you're looking at now. I really do hope we can restore this board to, to decorum. I rise to say one thing, and I have in my hand, Mr. Turner just said, oh, nothing said from the SEC, and all this is nonsense, it's all created. I'm going to have the SEC settlement agreement, from which I will quote. I'm not going to quote for 10 minutes, I'm just going to quote for about 1 minute. And it says, quote, the Commission, the SEC, the Commission does not contest respondents' view of the events reflecting Mr. Turner's omissions and understands that expenditures were made without their knowledge or approval, unquote. Thank you.
Ms. Moriarty.
So, turning to the motion, this motion is intended to redo the investigation that the SEC has just completed. The emails Mr. Turner has referred to are in the files. They can be read by anyone. They can be read with or without this committee being formed. I question whether this committee says it's going to make recommendations to the BET. When I think about our policy guide that has lots of regulations about the areas of authority that this commission has, I don't see, this board has, I don't see how there can be any recommendation that comes out of the committee's efforts that really directly affect the work of the BET. You're talking about making recommendations, I heard Mr. Mason, of advising our Republican town committee and our Democratic town committee of guiding candidates or some other guidance. So I don't understand what will come out of it. Mr. Turner is upset by the SEC action and the commission, and he has stated that he was misled by the SEC. We are also equally upset by this situation, and we believe when Mr. Turner told us he believed he was acting in compliance with the SEC regulations. That's the heart of the issue here. But we're talking about using our time, our energy, our resources to focus on something that's already been investigated and the information is there and takes us away from our other work. I also believe that if the people on this board are asking for transparency, I would propose maybe the work of a special committee be expanded to other transgressions and ethical problems that we have seen along the way on this board. And if the real intent is to review this situation seriously, get to the bottom of the facts in this case, the timetable suggested is laughable. It is clearly meant to comply or to be aligned with the political calendar. So for my colleagues to say this is not political intent is very disingenuous. And so I would have a motion to amend the motion on the table. The amendment is the motion to amend to increase the scope of the special committee to expand the investigation to include the following: prior SEC complaints and consent orders against Ms. Hess, the ensuing conflict of interest with the town clerk audit by Ms. Hess, possible ethical violations by Mr. Mason to influence the outcome of the parking service audit, possible harassment of the internal auditor, Mr. Turner's misinformation stated in the audit committee about sharing confidential information, negotiation of a one-sided contract on Greenwich Plaza to give away the town's ownership without proper valuation, preferential assignment of railroad station parking permits, possible fixing of parking tickets, electronic eavesdropping on Democratic campaign meetings in town hall. If we're really after ethical behavior, then we need to expand the scope.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Moriarty. Is there a second?
I'll second.
A second by Ms. Crumick. Discussion on the motion. Ms. Hess.
So I guess the courtesy phone call that I received by Ms. Oberlander basically threatening me that if I supported this motion, there would be things that come out. You know, all of you talk at this board about honesty, cooperation, being above board. But boy, you know, none of you are behaving that way. Mr. Weisbrod doesn't accept my comments at an audit committee. I should read the reply that I get. I mean,
Are you commenting on Ms. Moriarty's motion?
I am commenting. I cannot believe. I find it interesting, Ms. Oberlander, that your threat has actually come through. And you know, I have to tell you, I felt so threatened that I almost went to the police and was talked out of it. No, I'm not kidding. Don't laugh at that.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm listening to you with a smile on my face.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, I did actually contact our town attorney right after I received that call because I was, in fact, so upset by your threat and couldn't believe that we could actually behave this way. This has digressed so much. The fact of the matter here, this is so out of control. I am just so flabbergasted that this could actually happen. And quite frankly, you want to seek the highest office in this town, and this is how you're behaving by threatening?
Ms. Hess, my courtesy call was in reaction to you submitting a motion on the agenda to let you know that if you want to submit a motion investigating ethics, that the investigation broadens. That was it, just to give you a heads up. It was not a threat, as I said on the phone. It was a heads up. And, you know, you decided this is your motion, that's what you want to do. There's a motion on the floor to expand the scope of this chair special committee. You will have the opportunity to vote on that motion, and we'll see where the committee goes. The motion was presented in the interest of transparency, right? So if you want transparency, let's have a discussion. Mr. Mason.
Two things. One question through the town attorney, and then I'll comment on Ms. Moriarty's motion. Did you receive that call from Deborah Hess with her concern?
Madam Chairman, I do not think it would be appropriate for me to comment on any contacts I've had with any members of the board. I don't think that would be attorney-client privilege, and I would prefer not to respond to it, sir.
Thank you very much. I would like to get to Ms. Moriarty's motion. I would not support the motion as an addition to this motion. However, if you would like to do it as a separate motion, I would love to support that. I think there's a lot of things you brought up there. I heard my name mentioned, and I don't mind that because I think it's probably a good time to learn how to operate this town. So I think my name was mentioned with parking services. I think that would be good because I think the town would find it interesting to know that why every complaint was going on with people who were looking at documents and everything when the chair of this board, before she was appointed chair, was having lunch with the internal auditor without even the internal auditor's manager's notice and not on a partisan basis, which I could say, and I've made a lot of votes in behalf of the town, I can honestly say through that period.
Mr. Mason,
Excuse me.
Mr. Mason, that's a point of order. That is not true.
Okay.
Actually.
Well, we can,
So
we
you
can have that. The committee can work
You're
on
right.
that.
The committee can work on whether
So-
you make misrepresentations on the board. That is exactly
I
right.
would say, I'll take a little leery to say that my credibility in this town is in the top 1/10 of 1%.
Can I,
Again, we're talking about
can I just ask
misrepresentation.
a point of order? I heard a motion, I did not hear a second, and then for
It
Mr. Fox.
was seconded by
Oh, it
Ms.
was?
Crumick.
Okay, I didn't hear that. And then for Mr. Fox, does this motion require a majority or 2/3 vote?
I would look upon this as a motion to amend, which would require a simple majority.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on Ms. Moriarty's motion? So we have a motion by Ms. Moriarty, seconded by Ms. Crumick, to amend the motion to form a BET committee to investigate.
That's not what a motion is.
It's the motion to amend the motion on the floor. The motion on the floor was to form a BET committee to investigate identified Connecticut State Elections Enforcement Commission complaints and rulings, and the motion is to amend that to include a number of items, just to make sure we're all clear on what we're voting on, to include prior SEEC complaints and consent orders against Ms. Hess, ensuing conflict of interest with town clerk audit by Ms. Hess, possible ethical violations by Mr. Mason to influence the outcome of the parking service audit, possible harassment of the internal town auditor, Mr. Turner's misinformation in the audit committee about sharing confidential information, negotiation of one-sided contract on Greenwich Plaza to give away town's ownership without a proper valuation, preferential assignment of railroad station parking permits, possible fixing of parking tickets, electronic eavesdropping on Democratic campaign meetings in Town Hall. Okay, that is the motion to amend. We will take a name vote. Ms. Vasiliotis.
No.
Mr. Turner.
No.
Ms. Tarkington.
No.
Mr. Raymer.
Yes.
Ms. Crumick.
Can you come back to me?
Ms. Moriarty.
Yes.
Mr. Mason.
No. No.
Mr. Drake is a no. Mr. Weisbrod.
Yes.
Ms. Hess.
What a surprise, no.
Mr. Deuce.
No.
Ms. Crumick.
Yes.
And I am also a yes. That motion has failed. 5-7. I note that transparency apparently doesn't work two ways. Now we have a motion on the floor to, for the chair to form a BET committee to investigate Connecticut State Elections Enforcement Commission complaint. Further discussion on that motion. Mr. Raymer.
So I said before that I thought that the moment was politically motivated. I can understand the hurt or whatever that people felt from the events of 2017 as well. I can see both sides of it. I'd like to try and find a way to deal with the core purposes of this motion without having the political charge in the background. And I think a way to do that would be to have the committee act, but to have the committee act after Election Day. And so I'm going to move that there be a postponement of this motion and the chair's action on this motion to the November meeting of the BET. If there's a second.
Second for discussion. Second.
So we have a motion by Mr. Raymer,
Can't discuss
seconded
motion,
by Mr. Mason to postpone discussion,
To postpone action on this
postpone
motion, further
action
action on this
on the motion
I'm-
until
yeah.
the November BET.
Yeah, I'm postponing, continuing the matter to a date certain. I don't know what the November date of the meeting is, but whatever is the November date of our meeting.
Okay. Discussion, Mr. Mason.
More of a question to my colleague, Mr. Raymer. So are you saying that you would support this motion if the response date was after Election Day, or that the committee wouldn't begin its work till after Election Day?
This matter would appear, exactly as it appears right now, would appear on the agenda of the November meeting of the BET for further discussion and action as vote as appropriate. It's a motion to continue the matter for 2 months, roughly 2 months, to the November meeting.
November 18th.
Till November, thank you, to November 18th.
So,
And if
sorry.
my colleague through the chair was asking if I would vote in favor of the motion in return for the postponement, I do not intend to support the motion, but I think it should be heard at a time when it doesn't have the political charge. I think this is a terrible moment for the BET. I'm sitting here disgusted listening to all this.
Mr. Mason?
I think what Mr. Raymer's doing is making a motion to postpone this item till our November
That's right.
BET meeting. That's his actual motion.
That is my actual motion. Very well put, thank you.
Do you second that? You were the seconder. You seconded, but is that the motion that you thought you were seconding?
No, but for discussion and for the purposes of conversation, I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion to postpone this item until the November meeting.
And it's
Seconded.
bipartisan action.
Oh, it has to.
Bipartisan for the putting it on the floor. Open to discussion.
I've already said my piece on it.
Mr. Mason?
So, I don't want to keep agreeing with Mr. Raymer, but it seems to be,
It's upsetting, isn't it?
it's upsetting. I'll answer your question for you, not speaking directly through you, not directly to you, but through the chair. It's upsetting. The conversation in the last few minutes has been very interesting. We need to go back to the basic premise that none of us intended for this night to happen, but some of us created it. And I want to say that I think, if I can take the liberty, Ms. Krummick, I think your comments were starting to go down the road of healing for this board. It's a shame others don't. It's a shame other people have broken rules, spoken out of balance. But we didn't create this tonight, but the voters deserve an answer. They deserve to know what happened. We've had 19 months since the complaint was filed. Some of you on this board have said to me, and we can judge my credibility again, why did you guys go file that complaint? I'm likely to get pinched for this. Some have said I made the biggest mistake of my life. And I am fully sympathetic for those mistakes, because erasers are on pencils for everyone. But in 19 months, if the shoe is on the other foot, I think Ms. Oberlander was at a meet and greet recently for the campaign and made a comment that I can't say that I would do something, I wasn't there, but I can't say I would be doing much different if the shoe isn't on the other foot. I don't know that to be fact, and I would give you credit if you did say that. But what's before us tonight is a very touchy situation. This board works, lives, committee meetings, full meetings. This is just not good for the town. We've all agreed to that. Listen to the agreements up here. Listen to the agreements that we have. People talk about accountability. I'll go back to things that have been written in the paper. I challenge you to ask me who's written about accountability. We talk about accountability on broad spectrums. Why don't we just have some accountability in Greenwich?
Mr. Mason, are you talking about your motion?
I am telling you, I will not support Mr. Raymer's motion to postpone it till November. I think it's well-founded. I think we're trying to find a solution to this. I think a little more time, we may. But my point that I have right now is I stand by forming this committee. Can the work be done by October 23rd? I want to use Ms. Moriarty's comment that it's ludicrous that we would be able to do that. It may be, I don't know. But we've had lots of committees that have been formed that didn't meet a deadline. That's not the issue. The issue is there's so much fight to prevent an open conversation in this community. It's boggling. It's why would you want to do that? I see some of our members screaming at the opportunity to say, look, I didn't mean to do this. This was not my intent. I see other members saying, I didn't know it was an honest mistake. I hear lots of complaints, but the damage is being done. Some of you have political experience in campaigns before, filed before. We all filed before, okay? There needs to be a conclusion to this. The committee was the safest way to do partially what Mr. Raymer wanted. Instead of this, there was no intention tonight to have any accusations about who did what or who didn't. Tonight was to form a committee to take this and have it as transparent as possible. Everybody here could be involved. I'm more than open, okay? I'm not sure. I don't know what the SEC said, but we have got to do this. The transparency that we seem to be avoiding is what is the campaign statement of the year. I don't get it. I just don't get it. The outcry, the articles in the paper, we need to stop that.
Mr. Mason, can you please speak to the motion?
The original motion on the table is what I would support, so I will not support Mr. Raymer's motion to postpone this item till our November meeting.
Thank you. I'd just like to respond. I'm not sure what you were referring to, but I can assure you that it was your right to put the item on the agenda, and I certainly would never rule that out of order. And we had the discussion after conversations with Mr. Fox about germaneness. Oh, I wanted to come back to that. Speaking of which, Mr. Fox, thank you for that. Was a reminder to me. But I certainly would not put a motion to investigate your colleagues on the agenda during an election season when it's very clear to you as the former candidate for First Selectman that I'm running for First Selectman and your colleagues are running for the same board, and pretend that it's anything but political. I would never have done that. I would never have had the conversation about the other ethical violations or concerns or questions in this body. That's not the way I think we get the work of the public done. I also wouldn't have spent $2,500 of the taxpayers' money for your political exercise. But here we are, and we're having it transparently. I've got nothing to hide. We've got half of the emails. You'll get the other half of the emails. We can have a discussion, the whole community. It will be up online. Why we're spending the taxpayers' money for you to run a political game like this, so be it, but everything is perfectly transparent. Mr. Fox, it reminded me I wanted to come back to the question of germaneness. In terms of what's an appropriate question to determine fitness for this body.
Is this in relation to Mr. Raymer's motion that's on the
It's
floor?
actually yes, because it's about what the special committee is going to do.
Certainly.
So, excuse me,
Mr.
Certainly,
Mr.
Fox.
Raymer's motion is well in order. A motion to postpone an item for 2 months. That's certainly in order. It's seconded.
This is about the underlying motion. Mr. Fox, in thinking about forming a committee to investigate concerns and germaneness, are there any limitations? So,
Madam Chair,
running a traffic light.
There's a motion on the floor.
Running a traffic light, would that talk to qualification, breaking the law, drinking too much, behavior unbecoming a board member?
There's a motion on the floor about dates. You are not speaking about dates.
I'm speaking about the underlying motion.
I think we need to dispose of the current motion before you ask the town attorney your question, because we have a motion on the floor.
That is a question for the town attorney.
But we have a motion on the floor to
That is a
postpone.
question for the town attorney. Do I need to limit my questions to you as town attorney to timetable? Or can I, it might actually be relevant. I actually would like to know what's included in the question, because if I'm going to form a committee to investigate our BET member ethics and our behavior, I want to know how much I need to get in my 32 days, actually. So when I'm looking at behavior unbecoming a BET member, our town volunteers, what are the parameters when I decide to embody this committee that I'm being asked to embody?
Well, two things. I think with respect to your first question, the main motion, or I'm sorry, not the main motion, the motion to amend, it is debatable. It requires a second, which it has had. This is under section 14 of Robert's Rules. Is debatable, but debate is limited in that it must not go into the merits of the main question any more than is necessary to enable the Assembly to decide whether the main question should be postponed and to what time. So I think if in fact you...
So for me, coming off of this board, actually, if I would like the underlying committee to take a look at all possible concerns of ethics, there might not be enough time. Truly, if we were to postpone it, if we were to actually open the door to this kind of inquiry. So it is relevant to me, if I agree to postpone it, that we might in fact run out of time. So I'd actually like to know the limits of germaneness on the creation of a special committee. Because I assume it's still within the prerogative of the chair, despite the fact that the request was the amendment that would have expanded it was rejected in the interest of transparency, that I could actually think that there is a public interest in having this discussion in an open forum, actually, on all of the possible violations, right? It is still within the chair's discretion for a special committee.
I think the second question you raised with me as to how far and to what extent the committee can go, I think that's controlled by Section 62 of Robert's Rules, which talks in terms of looking into the question of the fitness for office of an individual or individuals. I think there's a distinction between the concept of could and the concept of should.
Yes.
I think it's applicable here. I think the intention of the body, as I listen to the debate, is whether or not whether or not one went through a stop sign. So my opinion would be they would not get into that. Whether or not one was engaged in illegal activity, I don't, in terms of some of the incidents we've had in this town, let's assume for the sake of a hypothetical that an individual, not these individuals, was engaged in the commission of a misdemeanor, and they wanted to look into that. I think they have the right to look into that. That's not what's dealing with here. It appears to me as though they're an inquiry into what occurred before the SEEC and what they did or didn't do as part of that process. So I do not foresee, as I listen to the debate, that one would get engaged in debate as to whether or not one violated a traffic.
But it could extend to other ethical concerns.
Theoretically, it
Yes.
could,
Right.
but I don't think that's the intent of the motion.
Well, no, not the Republican motion. That was limited only to the Democratic side, right?
It's limited
Yes.
to what the SEEC did.
And right on the Democratic side. But
Correct.
it could be, but the scope could be broadened to affect the ethical considerations on how it would affect the work of this board.
It could be, but I believe, Madam Chairman, that has already been voted on and voted down.
Yes, but that doesn't foreclose the chair from creating a committee to do that,
Separate and distinct from this.
or as a subpart of it, right? It's a chair's committee, special committee.
It's a special committee formed by the board to investigate certain issues.
This one.
This one.
But
is,
a
yes,
chair's committee,
That's a different concept.
right. Okay, so you're saying that were I to form this committee,
This committee.
the committee that's been requested by the Republican members to investigate their Democratic colleagues, right?
Correct.
That your recommendation would be to limit it only to the current SEEC.
My recommendation, and I believe the wording of the resolution limits it specifically to what the SEEC did or didn't do. It doesn't go beyond, it doesn't go to traffic violations or other issues. It goes to what's in the resolution.
So it could go to SEC opinions,
It could be reviewed,
Right.
yes.
SEC consent orders. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fox. We have a motion on the floor to postpone debate on this item until November. All action on this item until November. Ms. Vasiliotis.
Yeah, again, I was just not clear with Wayne's explanation. The motion is pretty specific. It says that to investigate the SEC complaint and ruling decision for 2 files, including their recent action and ongoing investigation. And then you're saying that's what this would be limited to. This committee would be limited to that, and it shouldn't be expanded to other SEC violations.
That would be correct. That issue has already been discussed and debated and voted on by the board.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
But that is for this motion, but a chair's committee.
That's a different issue.
Different issue could be established to broaden the scope.
Under the generic policies that you have, I think that is
Yes.
a possibility.
Yes, in the interest of full public disclosure. All right, further discussion on the motion to postpone. Mr. Deuce.
Please remind me which way the vote goes. Yes means what and no means what?
Yeah, the motion is a motion to postpone all action on this until November.
So a yes vote supports the postponement, a no vote does not.
I vote no.
Ms. Hess.
No.
Mr. Weisbrod.
Yes.
No.
Mr. Drake is a no. Mr. Mason.
No.
Ms. Moriarty.
Yes.
Ms. Krummick.
Yes.
Mr. Raymer.
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington. Mr. Turner.
No.
And Ms. Vasiliotis.
No.
And I am a yes, and that motion has failed 5-7. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Any further discussion on the motion?
Yes, Madam Chairman. Oh, you?
Oh.
No, please. Okay.
So, Mr. Turner, is this a short comment? I think the question is, you've already spoken on the underlying motion. You've already had your 10 minutes. I think Robert's rule says you're not permitted to speak on the motion again, but if you're going to make a short comment in the interest of public discussion, certainly open to it. Yes, no? No. Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Okay. Ms. Vasiliotis. Oh, wait, I guess I'm going to read, just so we make sure everyone knows what we're voting on.
Final comments.
Mr. Drake.
Please tell me how you would see managing this when this. Sorry, just please tell me how you'd like to manage this. I think it would. What I would recommend is you form the committee, and afterwards I'll make a motion about its composition. If you're going to rule that out, I'll make the amendment now. And it's
Yeah,
just so I can finish my sentence. I'm sorry. You go, and I'll. To be polite, go ahead. But I want to finish my sentence, but you go.
You asked how I'm going to manage it. I
No,
don't, how I'm going to
staff it. Staff it.
I haven't gotten that far, Mr. Drake. I'm going to spend more of the town's taxpayers' dollars that, at your request, I was working with Mr. Fox, actually, on that issue.
Then I'm going to amend the motion on the floor.
Okay, so would you like to make a motion?
I would. I'd like to amend the motion on the floor to nominate its members now. And I just think that's in order, because if I could finish, I think, and we can debate it, I think the legal advice is going to be that 5 Democrats can't serve. There are 3 Republicans who don't wish to serve. That's 8 crossed out. I think you got 4 to choose among. I have a recommendation, but I'm happy to hear yours. But therefore I'm going to make an amendment to the motion that says these.
Okay, point of order first, though. Mr. Fox.
That's the proper action.
If the motion is for the chair to form a special committee, whatever our policy and procedures allows, with the policy and procedures manual directs that the chair appoints the members of the special committee, is it in order for a member to add a motion to direct the membership of the committee?
Can I just
I'm asking that for Mr. Fox. Let him answer, please. I did
Well-
not recognize you, Ms. Vasiliotis. This is a question
But the
first to
question is
Mr.
whether
Fox.
it's a special committee or not, because the motion says committee, not a special committee.
Do our policies and procedures differentiate? Mr. Fox?
I don't think this is a special committee. This is a committee set up under Robert's rules to do a review of what took place at the SEEC. I do not think it is normal or usual for a member to suggest names when they are asking the chairman to appoint a committee.
So, is there a process in Robert's rules?
Yes.
I'm asking Mr. Fox, Mr. Drake.
There is a process in the resolution which says for the chairman to make the appointments.
There's a process in the resolution that we're,
The resolution directs how it should be done.
right, okay. So then, the resolution, meaning the resolution before us this
Correct.
evening. So Mr. Drake is amending the resolution, right? Is that he's making a motion to amend that resolution?
I think he's entitled to make the motion to
Right.
amend, but I haven't heard what that is yet.
Yes, so that's the question. So he's making a motion to amend the resolution so that he changes the process for appointment.
I think he's entitled to make the motion, but I would like to hear the motion before we rule on it.
Okay, Mr. Drake.
The motion is simple. It's provided in Robert's rules. If you give me a moment, I'll find the page. That under these circumstances, the body can vote to select the members of the committee by ballot. That's what I'm proposing. It's in Robert's rules. So we 12 would select the members of the committee. I think you only got 4 to choose from, so there's some flexibility. So that's my motion, my amendment.
I'm not sure why we would have only 4 to choose from, actually.
Well, then
So, so I'm going to defer to, I haven't read that yet, so I actually think that maybe we'll take a hiatus while we read Robert's rules.
Second.
It's fine.
Quite well
Yes.
from a number of standpoints.
So do we need to vote? So I'm gonna, do we need to make a call for a, we're gonna take a recess.
Let's go talk.
I don't know. Nope, I don't know.
It's in 62, 61, 62, 63, something. So, page 657. So here, just as an example, this is a confidential investigation committee. That's what we're talking about. So this part of the verse is, so, reading that.
Sad day for Greenwich, John.
Mr. Fox, could you deliberate with us as well? I think this is, I mean, you're having some private focus here.
Come join us, David. That's what I meant. On the 5, sir, it's contrary to proper principle.
That's different from choosing the members by ballot.
Yes, it is different. But I'm just saying, she's only got 4 members to choose from, because 5 of them are after. If we chose to let it do it by ballot, second matter. Now who's going to staff it? Question of staffing. We have 5 that can't serve, 2 that won't serve. We have 4 to choose from. And I'm going to make a motion that we staff it again.
So your motion would be that your proposal would be to
amend the resolution so that the committee is established today. And that its members are named today.
If there are only 4 members that are eligible, how would you consider those 4 to be? Minority representation.
Tony, I think, is the only minority you can have. And then I think you've got.
I need this gentleman. Respectfully, our rules supervede what's in Robert's rules, and it says that when there's a committee, there'll be established pleasure of the chair, and there'll be equal representation. So it's not a question of 5-3 or whatever of Section 160 says. Our rules call for it to be an equal number of Republicans. And it gives the grace initially to the chair of the selection. That is our rule. I think they're entitled to respect. I don't think anybody in the room wants to create a political imbalance. In any event, equal representation of each party. It's a terrible day for the town. And I'm really minding, thinking about quitting Canada.
Hey, Jenny. Is there an argument to be made?
It's all we're allowed to create. We have standing committees, liaisons, and special projects. That's all. Well, this is not a good example. I don't see a difference between a special project team and a committee. I think that that's. It's definitely a report as established by the chair. And I think you ruled, and I'll accept the ruling, I think it's the right ruling, that if this body can create a motion in which they direct the chair to exercise their discretion to create. I wasn't sure, but nevertheless they voted. And so that's done. But I believe that now, so she has a direction to establish a special project team. And then our rules, I view our rules requiring equal balance of the two parties.
Which you have.
Well, I don't know who's going to.
No, but on the existing committees you have.
Yeah. All the committees are equal balance. And there's no tie-breaking vote of the chair of any committee. We have a DPT, but we don't have a budget committee.
That's true. Let me ask you this question.
Actually, something asked back.
Are you?
Yes, you told me. I'm going to withdraw my change.
So I was just saying to Wayne that our rules require an equal representation.
Yeah, I'm going to withdraw, so let's not discuss it. I'm withdrawing.
So that becomes a moot issue.
I mean, I don't know what Bill's motion is going to be.
I'm withdrawing.
I don't think awkward position to be in. You're the attorney for the town. I didn't raise this, ugly enough. When Deborah calls you, I don't think she's entitled to confidentiality. You're not her attorney. You're the attorney for the town. And that's a conflict between the two. You have to pick who your client is. Your client is the town.
Any client. And there have been a number of
She's not your client. I think I did. I was looking forward to it.
What's your impression?
So suppose that a company has an adverse reason, I'm not saying it is in this setting, but it could easily happen.
It could happen, but it didn't happen.
Okay, I'm not saying it is, and I don't want to go there. You do your job very well. Thank you. You're welcome.
Yes. Be careful when they give you something else. Don't mess around with things. No, I have a very basic question. 32-day clock. When does it start? Look at this. If you need 32 days, when does it start? Didn't you almost retire? As soon as they name the members. Says that. Yeah. So did New England. These are civil suits. He could be innocent. He could be a former president. I'm surprised you didn't get into more trouble as happening. Racist remarks. Downhill after that. You're gonna have to take minutes for the special committee. I got a field day editing the minutes for this meeting. Yeah, who's gonna edit that? How can you keep track of it? I'm glad I don't do these minutes anymore.
You did such a nice job on the last workshop when I went to format for the workshop. I went right to it.
I used to do the budget committee all day meetings. All day meetings. They were tough.
No wonder. No, I just have the workshop minutes this morning.
Oh, the workshop? You want full Thursday? Twain, did you think you'd have these many questions?
Yeah, I did actually.
Did? You ever see anything like this in Darien?
No.
Not even close? They used to have it, I have to tell you the story about it. Remember Sharpie? The guy who got arrested for the coins? The
Yes,
parking?
yes, yes, yes.
Kate went to West Haven with Richie Boyer. Remember him? I was the number one candidate to take that job. I don't know how many years ago. And I contacted Kate. A guy named John Gardell was one of the banks that had the account there. And they told me, he says, you don't want to work there. He said, there's a chairman of the Board of Finance that has an office, and he sits there. You know what I'm talking about?
I know just who you're talking about, who's now deceased.
I actually dropped out. Okay, I was the number one candidate. Paul Santoro was the number two candidate.
Really?
He got the job because I dropped out. And the third guy, I think, dropped out, so I had. And Paul called me up, and I counseled him over 2 days, like a couple hours, because he went through the first interview, and he said, they were asking me questions about bonding. He says, they came from the town of Greenwich, they don't do bonding. And I had the experience working in Stanford. He came from Greenwich. He went to Richmond. Did he go to jail?
I think he did.
I thought he just lost his house and.
We got every night back to the town.
That's what I heard. Plus you threw in audit fees and legal fees and 90-something thousand or something. Yeah, he took my place here when I left. I used to be I started here. I started here, and then I went to Stanford, and I was working with Joe Tarzia on the internal audits. He controlled the audit function up there.
I bet he did.
He used it as like, I'll tell you who else was in cahoots with this, Malloy. Malloy used Tarzia before he, around between like 85, before Malloy surfaced and ran. He was on the Board of Finance, and before he ran, he used Tarzia to go after people. Remember the 911 audit? I was terrible. I had to testify at all the ethics charges. George Mayer was up on ethics, Serrani, Tom.
Was the comptroller, Tom Canino?
No, he was the purchasing agent. He was found guilty. No, the controller was there. Yes.
Where'd that?
Yes. And I heard that the IRS pinched him. He was involved in a kickback scheme. All the news. He hired this guy when they were building 888 Washington Boulevard. When they were building it, we were over at the MOB, the municipal office building, and before Canino hooked up with this kid who was a computer whiz. He was, that kind of thing. And he lived in Pompton Lakes, New Jersey. And he set up a dummy company, and they were sent over $1 million down to him. All fake invoices. Maybe. You see it this bad. I never thought it would be this bad.
Everything that you expected would happen.
What's that?
It became so personal.
I don't know if you can heal. How's your son doing?
Good.
Has he got a chance to climb the ladder up there in the stands?
For the current thing of the Democratic Party in Connecticut, he's not a right fanatic like his old man. Because he's more conservative than most of them.
What's his aspiration?
I don't think he has any enjoy what he's doing.
What is he, a lawyer?
He's a lawyer.
Yeah. Dan is he?
Yes, but he's moving up within the House Franklin Committee chairman. So he's been there for about 6 years. So he wants to continue that for a while. He wants to be on the ballot.
How is it better without Malloy and Barnes?
It's a different perspective. I'm not saying it's better what they're doing, but you don't have the chip on
tough to do the state.
I told you what happened with someone. He was a freshman.
Is it the Malloy story?
It's a damn long story.
I think you told me the story. Go ahead.
You're gonna go over here till the governor go fuck himself. You're over here. You should have told him over there.
What is Malloy?
Nice to see you. Yeah, what happened? Okay, but we're gonna have a call or a meeting or
Whatever works for you guys, call us fine.
That's for that's on the ethics stuff.
On the ethics, I hate to drag you in.
Okay, no, call is fine. Whatever works. Then we've also got the other thing, which I'm doing. I'm doing. Pat is doing.
On the
Brady is doing. Yeah. What are we doing?
waiting.
Somebody.
For the final package deal from Pat and Brady. They were gonna sit down and come in.
The last thing I saw was a Pat. Something.
Jeff?
So it's never.
Push that along.
I'd rather watch a Jets game.
Good, good.
Okay, and then we'll deal with the other thing.
Losing 6-0 to the
Marlins. Must-win game. Must-win game. 6-0 to the Marlins. This is gonna kill us. This is gonna kill us. I'd rather watch that than this. I'd rather watch that. I'd rather watch the thing I love more than the world is the business. Fine. Oh, fortune. He earned it. Fortune. I scored the week after that. But they have no he can't do it himself. He's gotta be scratching his head saying, what? He got his guaranteed money.
Are you making that motion?
He's thinking, at least I'm better off in Antonio. Oh, yeah, he walked away.
Okay, we're all back. We'll reconvene at 9:48. Mr. Drake.
We were about to vote on the original motion. I withdraw my proposed amendment to the original motion.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Mr. Raymer?
No, it was not my understanding that we were done with debate on the original motion. I don't accept my colleague's statement that we were about to vote. I have a point of debate that I wish to raise.
Hey, Mr. Raymer.
I'd like to, through the chair to Mr. Turner, there were emails of which you read portions, including a portion of an email of the 2nd of October 2017. I'd like to read the entirety of that email and then ask one or two questions through the chair of Mr. Turner with regard to that. The email of October 2nd, 2017, from Mr. Turner to all other 5 of us reads as follows. After we all met in the candidates meeting last week, I've spent a great deal of time with the SEC Enforcement Division on how to campaign and promote voting all Ds and down ballot for BET, all with a view to gaining BET control and not breaking any rules. You might recall that's my real objective, and all the voter models say it's doable, although quite expensive, and a heavy lift. Today, I got the answer, and I think you'll really like it. Paragraph. Both attorneys there agree that in order to do this, I can promote electing all 6 of us as long as I keep my name, etc., too, on the promo piece, paren, in order for me to pay the vast majority of the costs, close paren. However, in doing so, I have to add attribution to the materials for each of the remaining 5 of us, e.g., paid for by ... In order to add attribution, the rest of you have to do one of 3 things. Claim an exemption on Form 1 that you will be using only personal funds for your campaign, aka the personal exemption. Form a candidate committee with a treasurer, as I have already done, or claim on Form 1 that you're not going to spend over $1,000. They said that paying $1,000 for the effort would be reasonable for each of us to contribute to get the attribution. No higher amount is required. Paragraph. So I feel strongly about continuing to go down this path, but we have to get unanimous okay and participation of $1,000 each. This is our only option. What do you think? Please let me know as soon as you can, as I have printers, phone bankers, door knockers organizing now for the next wave of promotions. Oh, you should have gotten a postcard already as a start to the effort, laying the foundation to begin telling the story. Please join me for this endeavor. That's the entirety of that email. Now, if I may, through the chair, ask Mr. Turner. There came a point in time that you sent to us an invoice for approximately $7,500 from an outfit called Seaside Design. Is that correct, Mr. Turner?
That sounds correct.
And your email asked us to remit $1,000 each to Seaside Design. Is that correct, Mr. Turner?
Without having the email in front of me, I don't know.
Do you recall whether or not the other 5 each paid $1,000 each to Seaside Design?
I don't recall.
Now, very importantly, please look through those emails that are stacked before you and read out to us, if you would, any email which discloses the name of any other vendor besides Seaside Design. I'm listening, Mr. Turner.
Well, you're asking me to go through my emails. I'd be happy to.
All right, take your time. Please read out any email in which you disclose the name of any other vendor besides Seaside Design.
Well, first of all, I don't have all of the emails here. These are just some of the items. So even though it might not be here, doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Well, I suggest to you that it doesn't exist. Why don't you dispel that notion by reading an email that discloses the name of another vendor besides Seaside Design?
I've already answered that.
I'm listening.
I have already answered that.
Mr. Turner, your mic's not on.
I've already answered that.
Please read from the emails in front of you a disclosure of any amounts that you paid to any of these vendors, disclosing to us amounts of your expenditures. Read those emails to us. Would you kindly do that?
Again, I don't know if they're here, and plus, this is only a portion of the entire collection of emails.
Well, then,
I think, well, let me finish, please.
Mm-hmm.
I think to be fair to the people of this town who need to know the truth, that you first let me gather all of the emails together, and then answer your questions if it's there.
Well, let's start with the emails that you brought. Please read from the emails the name of any vendors that you disclosed to us, the names of any sums that you paid to these vendors, with the exception of the $1,000 apiece to Seaside Design.
I'll do that at another time, as I've already said. Thank you.
Now, this is a good time, and credibility is involved. Why don't you read out to us so we know what the truth of your allegations were?
Don't address me about integrity and allegations. I can assure you
This
that
question is going through the chair. Mr. Turner, do you have any emails that respond to Mr. Raymer's request right now?
I've already answered that. I don't know. I don't have all of the emails.
So right now in front of you, you don't have any emails that respond to Mr. Turner's, Mr. Raymer's request?
I don't know, and it wouldn't be fair to the people in this town to not look through all of the emails that could possibly contain the information.
The question that Mr. Raymer asked you was, in front of you, You seem to have an indexed, and you read actually quite a bit of them. Do you have any, I'm going to say that you're not prepared to answer that question, or no, there's nothing in your emails in front of you. Mr. Raymer, do you have more questions?
I think I've made my point.
Ms. Cromick, did you want to add something?
Yes, through the chair, I'd like to ask Mr. Turner, why he told us that the SEEC had approved his plan when apparently it hadn't.
That's quite the contrary. They had approved my plan, and if you look at the phone records of SEEC, if you look at the detailed log of SEEC, it is quite obvious that not only did they approve it, but I continued to keep in touch with them along the way to ensure that no mistakes were made.
Mr. Raymer.
I wish I'd brought the materials with me to be more detailed, but I can be fairly detailed and I make representation to my colleagues. On the 27th of September, there was an email from Mr. Turner to the SEEC. The SEEC does not respond by emails. They don't want to leave a written track. They speak verbally. And they don't make a record of a transcript of the call, but they do put a ticket in the file, a contact ticket, in which they, after the fact, summarize what was the nature of the conversation and their advice. On the 27th of September, the email from Mr. Turner indicates, and I'm having to paraphrase because I don't have it before me, but he inquires, can the group of us who are running sort of as a slate, can we participate together and each of us spend as much as we would like? They respond to that on the morning of the 2nd of October, according to their ticket. I'm sorry that I can't give you the ticket number, but
Point of information.
Yes.
Mr. Mason.
For a group of people who don't seem to want a committee, the committee's work seems to be going on here. Mr. Raymer's questions are not questions germane to the motion before us. Mr. Raymer is conducting an examination of Tony Turner's comments in relation to the SEC complaint. If that's what you'd like to happen, you're the chair, but it's out of order.
Mr. Mason, Mr. Turner made comments supporting his support for the motion. Mr. Raymer challenges the veracity of Mr. Turner's statements. Before we vote on the motion, Mr. Raymer wanted to make clear that there was a challenge to the veracity of Mr. Turner's statement. Did I capture that correctly, Mr. Raymer?
Yes, but I'm suffering a remorse that I feel like I'm contributing to the ill will which is so prevalent today. I think I've made my point. I'm not going to press it further. It may be the business of the committee later on. I'm going to stop at this place. I think that seems appropriate.
Mr. Weisbrod.
I think I'd just like to add one thing, however, and that is that if Mr. Turner is so convinced that the SEC did approve this plan, then why didn't he go for a hearing at the SEC to adjudicate that? His settlement concedes the fact that, that he did not, and he was fined accordingly. And let me just add from the settlement, just a couple of quotes from the actual settlement. Quote, the respondents relied in good faith upon Mr. Turner's representation that he properly consulted the SEC compliance attorneys and crafted a plan that had been reviewed and approved by the SEC. But then they determined that that was not the case. So, I think Mr. Turner is accusing the SEC, which he's done in the public, of malfeasance, that the SEC, improperly ruled in some fact. His litigation is with the SEC, and he had an opportunity to proceed via the SEC through the hearing process that the SEC, instead because he lost at the SEC and had to settle for a large amount, he, for whatever reason, wants to take his vendetta against the SEC or against Ms. Oberlander and others to the town and to waste everybody's time in the town of Greenwich. Thank you.
I would like to respond.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor.
Well, I would like to
The con-
respond,
the-
Ms. Oberlander.
No, Mr. Turner, you actually have spoken beyond your 10 minutes
have
on the
not been
motion.
able to respond
Yes,
to the
you have.
allegation that's
You know,
before us.
we're
I
going
not
to.
respond to the
no,
allegation?
I don't
We're
believe.
calling ourselves a
Mr.
democracy, and I can't respond?
Mr. Fox, I'm going to defer to the town council again on this. This is not germane at this point. Mr. Turner supported his motion. Members refuted his support for his motion. I'm going to defer to you.
Madam Chairman, I believe you are entitled to make a ruling as to whether or not Mr. Turner is out of order or not. Mr. Turner then has the right to do with that what he deems appropriate.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna rule this conversation out of order, and I'm going to request that we move on with a vote on the motion.
I move to appeal the decision of the chair.
Okay, so that needs a second. Is that correct? I'm learning. Oh, Ms. Vasiliotis seconded. Okay, we have another motion to appeal. First, I guess you have a ruling of the chair to declare the conversation out of order. And we have,
I wonder if I might prevail upon the chair to allow comment. It'll take less time than for us to go through the voting process.
we already have a,
We can withdraw it if the chair feels is appropriate.
Happy to.
how long is your rebuttal?
2 minutes.
All right. What is the will of the body?
Let's have
2 minutes.
Thank you. I note two comments that are simply false. One, Mr. Raymer said that SEEK does not answer by email. They do. I have copies of emails from SEEK to me. So let's be sure that we get the facts straight on that.
I apologize if I'm wrong.
Thank you. Secondly, Mr. Weisbrod said that why didn't I have the hearing at SEEK and that I lost at SEEK. I have made it very, very clear that immediately upon receiving the complaint from SEEK, I hired counsel and I have already wagered almost a full 2-year legal battle. And I determined by simply a cost-benefit analysis that it was going to cost far more than $52,000 to hire litigators, prepare for the hearing, and then consider, based on that, going to Superior Court for an appeal. So it was simply cost-benefit analysis that I made that decision. So to say that I lost, to say why didn't I have a hearing, has been very public, and I've been very transparent about that. Thank you, Ms. Oberlander.
I just wanted to make one final comment. The information about what transpired with the last campaign and with the SEC investigations are all public. All these actions will be published if they're not already up online. If my colleagues were really requiring a serious investigation into the conduct, then the dates of this motion would be different. The timing is clearly selected to coincide with the current election cycle. I've got nothing to hide, but this is a big distraction to the work of this board and doesn't serve the people of Greenwich.
So we have a motion on the floor to direct the chair to form a BET committee to investigate the Connecticut State Election Enforcement Commission complaints regarding the Democrats. I'm going to call for, the motion was submitted by 4 Republican members, Mike Mason, Deborah Hess, William Drake, and Andy Deuce. I'm going to call for a vote. Mr. Deuce.
Yes.
Ms. Hess.
Yes.
Mr. Weisbrod.
No.
Yes.
Mr. Drake. Mr. Mason.
Yes.
Ms. Moriarty.
No.
Ms. Crumick?
No.
Mr. Raymer?
No.
Ms. Tarkington?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
Aye.
Is that a yes? Is that a yes?
Aye.
All right.
It's a yes.
Ms. Vasiliotis?
Yes.
And I am a no. That motion has carried 7-5. I think it's a sad day for the BET and a sadder day for the town of Greenwich. $2,500 so far of taxpayers' dollars on this inquiry. While legal minds may like the inquiry, I wonder whether taxpayers will be happy with the use of their funds for partisan political purposes. It is happy to have had this conversation in the public so that we can all be very clear about what's going on. And I have received your motion, and I will be speaking with Mr. Fox about it further and will further advise the board. Mostly, I'm thoroughly disappointed, actually. And as a volunteer, there are really no words. I just have to reiterate, actually, I'm just going to apologize to anybody who's still watching that they have to, that this is what it's come to. Politics in Greenwich. Let's not talk about how Greenwich is different than the rest of the country anymore.
Are you accepting comments from other members?
We are moving on to the
okay.
next item
That's
of
what I
new
figured.
business, which is a change in BET policy and procedures manual. Mr. Raymer.
I received a request from the chair on Wednesday. The Policy and Procedures Committee consists of Michael Mason and myself. There is no chair of the committee. I have no prerogative to jump in and speak first. I hope Mike tolerates this. I think a little broader issue has to be raised. I'm going to propose something and then indicate to the body that I intend to ask Mike to join with me in a meeting to discuss it further, and then the committee will come and report back. The little further relates to this. There are actually 4 places in the, maybe I'm missing something, but 4 places in the Policy and Procedures Manual which are analogous. It is not just on page 18 where it says, let me just read from it. Sorry. Items may be added to the meeting agenda at the request of 4 members of the BET communicated to the chair at least 10 days before the meeting. That appears at page 18. In addition, there's 3 other things. On the same page, on page 18, regarding special meetings, there's provision that says, at the request of 4 members, a special meeting will be called by the chair. If you're going to make an amendment to make our provision analogous to that which appears in the Board of Selectmen, Mr. Fox had read it, but I'll read the additional words that appear there. It says, which items shall be germane to the duties and responsibilities of the Board of Selectmen. I think that's good language. I don't oppose that. I'm actually going to recommend it to my colleague. Obviously, it'll read Board of Estimate and Taxation instead of Board of Selectmen. I think it not only needs to go in the place that permits the 4 members to request an addition to the agenda, I think it also has to go also on page 18 where there's provision for the calling of a special meeting by 4 members. And that provision arises again on page 2. Where it also says that 4 members can precipitate a special meeting. And then there's an analogous paragraph also on page 25, if I'm not mistaken, which says that as to committees normally serving in equal political balance, it says, and most of our committees, with the exception of the Law Committee, are committees of 4. it says, the chair of the committee sets the agenda. He, she may do so in consultation with the members of the committee and/or professional staff as he sees fit, and subject to the inclusion of additional items to the agenda at the request of at least half of the members of the committee. If we're going to make that change, I think that change has to appear there too. So with permission from the body, I'm going to, Mike and I will come back to you at a future meeting with a recommendation of change or no change. I intend to propose this change to Mike. I don't know what Mike's view on it will be. I will mention, just as a matter of personal experience, since I've been around here for nearly 12 years now at this point, 3 of those provisions have existed in our rules for decades and decades. One of them is new. The one that is new is the one that has been exercised by the 4 members, making the request to place an item on the agenda. We had the experience as a minority party that there came a point in time when we were upset with language that was being requested of us by our colleagues in the guidelines. And unable to reach a resolution, we decided the solution as a minority was to propose a minority report to put forward guidelines on behalf of the 6 Democrats. I submitted them to Elaine, a staff person here in finance, asking that it be placed on the agenda. And I don't think a full 10 minutes went by before I had calls from both the BET chair and the board of and the budget committee chair telling me, I'll pick the rougher language of one of them, not the kinder language of the other, that matters see the light of day only when the majority party says that's all right. That's stuck in my craw, and I proposed the language that appears on page 8 3 times unsuccessfully. I think some credit to the Democrats in control of the board now. For the first time it was inaugurated as the Democrats were seated. I think it adds an element of an openness of our government that minority parties are allowed to put things on the agenda, and the Democrats are prepared to put that in at the moment when they enjoy, maybe a brief moment, when they enjoy a Democratic majority. I'm hoping that the language survives. I think it's a right and kind thing to do in the relationship between majority and minority parties. But Mike and I will look at this and we'll report back probably at the next meeting, but if not at the next meeting, then a soon meeting. And I thank you for tolerating that moment of reminiscence by me.
Mr. Mason.
I would be more than happy to meet. Last week was short notice, and but I'd be more than happy to meet on this. As you know, when we made that, when the change was made for 4 people, as I said earlier this evening, I didn't support that. I think the role of any chair of any board is to make sure materials are properly in place, everything's set up, materials available, and it's a very difficult job, as a couple of us here can tell you that, even from a committee level. So I think I'd be more than happy to do that. I will say also, I was the nicer guy in that conversation you had about the guidelines back in the day.
Yes, that's an accurate statement.
Well, thank you for clarifying that, because all of us were wondering. All right, so all right, so that item is not ready to come before us this evening, and we'll be revisiting it.
With my apologies.
Okay. Which brings us to the chair's report, which I'm going to forgo tonight, and brings us to the approval of the BET meeting minutes. You all received draft minutes from the July 22nd, 2019 BET regular meeting. Are there any, Ms. Crumick, you would like to present those minutes?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes, but first I need to amend what was provided to you in the packet on page 2. It's been brought to my attention by Ms. Tarkington that there was an inaccuracy. So on page 2, 5th line up from the bottom, the sentence reads, when advised that the director of purchasing, it should be when advised that the director of facilities
had approved the request for single-source purchasing for a contract between the GPS administration and the architect, KG&D Associates. The JPS administration was requested to provide a copy of the purchasing policy manual relating to the requisitioning ordering procedure to ensure compliance with the single-source procurement process, and then to add a clause at the end, comma, as well as a copy of the contract. She also pointed out to me that on page 3, at the bottom of the page, there is a motion. The motion was made by Mr. Turner. We'd included a seconded by Mr. Drake, but it's apparently seconded by Ms. Tarkington. So with those amendments, I'd like to get an approval of the amendments and then an approval of the minutes as amended.
Okay, any further comments to the minutes? We have an amendment to the minutes offered by the clerk. Do we need a second for the?
Probably.
So an amendment made by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The amendment has carried. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
So moved by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Mr. Raymer. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The minutes have been carried 12-0. Mr. Deuce.
Madam Chair, I move that we adjourn.
We need a second and a vote, and I might choose to stay here a little longer.
Why didn't you call on him earlier?
Yeah, Ms. Fasliotis, have you already left? Are you going to second that motion?
Yes.
All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? We are adjourned.